So, ever since the summer of 2022, with each passing day, with each passing month, with each passing decision in particular, it's been the decisions, though, that have led us to this point. Decisions about the implementation and the entry of Oklahoma and Texas into the SEC. And this is really the first time that it's felt real, that it's felt like, okay, this is going to happen. And this is what it's going to look like with these two superpowers joining the SEC. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We appreciate you all being here. Please leave those comments and questions there in the live chat. We will answer all these super chat questions and comments. Of course, we will answer others, but certainly you will be answered if you give us a super chat contribution. We appreciate you being here. More so than that, give me a call. We've left a link there in the live chat as well. So grab the link. Please join the show. Give me a call. And we're going to break down the SEC schedule for 2024 and what it all means. So schedules, I am into schedules. I have, for a very long time, just completely ripped the SEC scheduling format to shreds. It's been awful, but we will not focus on that tonight unless that becomes a talking point. I will let you know and explain, as I have in the past for many of you newcomers, why the SEC schedule has sucked since adding Arkansas and South Carolina in 1992, and has sucked even worse since adding Texas A&M and Missouri. Much like the ACC schedule has been awful in its management, in its concept, in its approach, and what it is meant to the season and the competitive nature of the sport and the competitive nature of a conference and trying to determine the best team as a champion. Awful execution and approach by the ACC. Awful execution and approach by the SEC. The Big Ten got it right. They are not our talking point tonight, though. It's about the SEC. So I am going to take my first look at the SEC football schedule for 2024. I'm guessing most of you already know much more than I do at this point because I've been hard at work talking Michigan football at 5 Eastern, Florida State at 6, Miami at 7, and then a conversation with my kids. So nothing that I know about this schedule right now. So we're going to have to find a site and we're going to have to run through the schedules. Maybe my favorite scheduling website, FBS Schedules, maybe that has them posted already. I do not know, but we will certainly get to that. So appreciate you all being here again. If you want to talk to me directly, grab the link that we have provided in the chat, and we'll talk SEC football. So as we proceed through the night, we will expand the topics to all of college football. We typically take all comers in regards to topics and storylines, but we are focused here on the SEC schedule. We're simulcasting on all the various channels. So welcome, Florida Gators, Alabama Crimson Tide, Auburn Tigers, LSU Tigers. Welcome in Georgia Bulldogs, national champions 2 times, and all of our SEC friends, including the 2 newcomers. Welcome in Oklahoma and Texas. And of course, we're going to be most intrigued by looking at the Texas and Oklahoma schedules. Let's dive in. And as we do, we're going to take our first call, but I would like to pull up the schedules. And we have a very appropriate first caller. So while we take a look, we will talk to our guy, DeReal MVP. DeReal, what's going on tonight?
Nothing much, Mark. I mean, the SEC just doing what they normally do, outmaneuvering the rest of college football.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, really. Listen, the fans love a 9-game conference schedule. I understand why people want to go to a 9-game conference schedule. I want to go to a 9-game conference schedule.
You do?
Absolutely. It'd be great. But there's one thing missing, Mark, and it's the most important element. Are we going to take into account the strength of schedule and the strength of record when looking who determines to be in the playoff? Because if I have an 8-4 team that goes to Alabama, Oklahoma, and then has home games against Georgia and LSU, they lose to every single one of them. And then people say, well, they're 8-4, they can't be in the playoffs. Then there's no reason the SEC should go to 9 games.
Okay, well, you understand right now that the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, the same committee, not necessarily the same members, but the same committee that is going to be taking us on into the next generation, the next iteration of the playoff at 12 teams, is going to be still using the same criteria. So the answer to your question is yes, and it's no. So it's yes in determining a distinction between Team A at 10-2 and Team B at 10-2, but it's not going to the length or the degree of trying to differentiate to say, man, this 8-4 SEC team played a gauntlet and they are really good. And if you can take Alabama to the wire and you can take LSU to a 1-score game and you can do this and you can do that and beat a decent non-conference opponent from the ACC or the Big 12 or somewhere else, you must be really good. Therefore, we're going to elevate you past a 10-2 team. I don't expect that to happen.
Well, if you don't expect that to happen, you got to give us a reward for playing a non-conference game, Mark. And if there's going to be no incentive structure, then why do it?
The reward is the tiebreaker.
Playing an LSU,
you already have the tiebreaker, and you will continue to have the tiebreaker.
I don't want just the tiebreaker, Mark. I want the spot.
Well, the way the sport's structured, the SEC and every other conference can do whatever they choose to do, and the SEC has, for the time being, decided to stay with 8 games. And much like you, I think we're on the same page. I would like to see them play 9 games because I want to see continuity across the sport with all the conferences. Number one. Number two, I understand on the flip side that they don't need to do that, that the schedules are tough enough, and all the SEC haters out there will diss the conference and the various teams for playing 3 cream puffs. And they do, most of them. Some of them will play 2 legitimate foes and 2 cream puffs, but many of them will play 3, your Kentucky Wildcats included.
Hey, you don't have to be shameful. We're just outsmarting the rest of the field. There is no reason to not play 3 cream puffs in the current structure.
No, there's not, because nobody's forcing you to do that. And when you're the best, if the Pac-12 was doing this, then it would be an utter joke. SEC haters are trying to make it a joke, and I get their point from a legalistic uniformity standpoint, but from a realistic standpoint, the SEC is still playing the toughest schedules because they've got the toughest conference, even though they're playing one less Power 5 opponent. And let's also understand that Power 5 opponents are not created equal versus Group of 5 opponents. So when the likes of Arkansas go out there and play and schedule Cincinnati and BYU in back-to-back years, that is like playing a Power 5 opponent.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mark. But I mean, with everything being so focused on the playoffs, I think everybody or almost everyone is saying 8 games is only going to be this season, and then they're going to 9. Whereas my feeling on it is we're going to see if a 9-3 SEC or a 8-4 Big Ten team makes the playoff. If they do, then the SEC probably goes to 9 games. If they don't, we'll probably stay at 8.
What's going to happen to get your dream to become reality of stretching these records to that degree is that the SEC is going to have to continue to dominate the sport. And so if the playoff record and the postseason record, number one, if the playoff record continues to be just a ridiculous 75% winning percentage or even greater than that, as it is right now, plus the teams in question that are being evaluated for that position took care of business out of conference, then that's going to be the formula that's needed to vault an 8-4 team into a playoff position past a 10-2 or 9-3 team from another conference. But I don't see that happening initially.
Well, I don't see it happening initially either, which is why I think the SEC is going to stay at 8 conference games for quite a while. I don't think it's a slam dunk decision. They're going to 9 games next year. I would like it to. I think there'd be more fun matchups. I mean, I'll give you a bit of a spoiler, Mark, about the schedule. Hopefully you don't mind, Mark. Do you?
I don't mind. It's not that much of a drama to me.
Okay. Well, Georgia's still not going to be playing Texas A&M at Texas A&M.
Okay.
So, I mean, just to tell you, the drought is still going on. So, unless there's incentive for it to happen, then there's no reason to schedule ridiculously hard games. If it's just you get 10 wins and you're in for the SEC, well, the SEC should do everything in its power to ensure the most amount of teams get 10 wins.
You're absolutely right. These leagues make decisions to put themselves in the best position to be successful, both from a money standpoint and from a competitive standpoint. And that's what they do. And that's what makes sense. And nobody holds them accountable because we don't have a commissioner.
You're exactly right, Mark. You're exactly right. And you know what would help holding the SEC to account is one of these other schools beat us. Because if you had Ohio State and Michigan both win their games last year, then maybe something would change. Maybe if the SEC wasn't what's their playoff percentage? Like 85%, something like that.
It's crazy. I think 14-4 comes to mind.
Yeah, if it wasn't that ridiculously high, maybe they would do something. Maybe if the SEC last year didn't beat the Pac-12, the Big 12, the ACC, and the Big 10 second best team with a bunch of different teams, and then maybe they would change it.
Maybe they would. Is there anything about this particular schedule that caught your eye in matching up? Of course, Texas, Oklahoma, that's the headliner. But it's also, so there's two reasons that this schedule release is more important and more interesting than other SEC schedule releases that we can pretty much predict. Actually, for the last 30 years, the SEC schedule releases, you don't need to have a release because we know what the schedule is. We just want to see the game times and the order of the games because the format has been such that we already knew what the schedule was going to be in conference. But now we've got a completely different format and 2 new teams. So is there anything that hit you as being either a brilliant move by the SEC? We already know that it's brilliant that they stayed at 8 conference games, but besides that, anything that's
from an SEC perspective, literally for everybody else's perspective, it's makes no sense. But poor Auburn. That's all I've got to say. Poor Auburn.
Let's look at Auburn.
Yeah, they might as well forget about their second year.
They've got Arkansas at home, as they typically do and have in the past. I got to, of course, reshape my thinking because that's no longer a set game. But Arkansas, as they always in the same division, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt. That's a bit of a soft touch there. Georgia on the road, Alabama on the road. They've always had to play them. Kentucky, Missouri. Well, I think actually, even though it's poor Auburn, it's always been poor Auburn because they are stuck with Alabama and Georgia. But there is no Ole Miss, LSU, Mississippi State on that schedule.
Yeah, Oklahoma's going to probably be pretty good, though.
Sure, but they have basically picked up a lot of Eastern Division teams to replace. They've picked up 3 Eastern Division teams to take the place of 1. And those 3 are not that good.
But still, I mean, looking at that, that's what, maybe 3-5, 4-4?
If they go 4-4 against that schedule, then I will say that Hugh Freeze has done an outstanding job.
Yeah, I'm just trying to stretch it in a positive direction, but I mean, yeah, that's tough, Mark. And that's why I'm saying if they go 8-4 with that schedule, they're a legit great football team.
great.
Good. Oh, well, compared to the rest of the country, they should be in the top 25. Beast Media wants me to point out Vanderbilt having a tough schedule, but the problem with that is Vanderbilt, they're so horrible that everybody else they play is going to be hard because they're Vanderbilt, Mark.
Yes, they relatively, from a relative standpoint, they always have a tough schedule because everyone's better than them. Yes. Well, they get stuck with Alabama. And I'm looking for the differences here. Of course, they play the SEC Eastern Division in the past. Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas at home, Auburn, Kentucky, LSU, Missouri. That is a tough schedule. Well, they're all tough schedules. They're all tough schedules. And what you're hoping to see, if you're a fan of any of these teams and you want the easiest possible schedule, is you're looking for Vanderbilt number one. And in my estimation, you're looking for Missouri number two, because I think even though they may not be the second worst team in the league right this second, long term, they're the most likely second worst team in the conference.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. Then after that, you probably want your Mississippi State, Arkansas, Kentucky, Golden Miss type team. Texas, you can even throw Texas into that group.
Wow. That's how good this conference is. Texas and Mississippi State are in a group of bottom feeders.
Yeah. I mean, talent-wise, they shouldn't be in the same group, but results on the field-wise, they probably are on the same group. So, just the way it is, Mark. I mean, that's all I got for you. Anything you've looked at, initially glanced over that excites you?
Well, as soon as I take a break from the calls here, and we'll get Sooner Thrawn on here next, instead of breaking down the individual schedules, I got to go back and see the format to see what I'm looking at, why I'm looking at certain teams against certain teams, what they came up with. But in terms of a brilliantly devised schedule, that was the Big Ten release last week. They actually put some serious thought into devising just about as good a scheduling format as I could have imagined.
Yeah, you're right. They've got balanced schedules. They've got difficult matchups for everybody. And listen, if you want to have great TV ratings and if you want to have great excitement amongst your fan bases, that's the way to go. But Mark, if you want to, I think if you want to have the most selected teams in the playoff and have the easiest path to win the national championships, this is the route to go. But anyway, that's all I got to you. Fight on to USC and their most likely 8-4 schedule in 2024.
And this fight on business may come to an end. Oh, we lost a reel, but I believe it comes to an end if Florida beats Utah. I think that's the deal. All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. We got Sooner Thrawn on the line.
Hey,
Man,
Mark.
it's been a while. How you doing?
How you doing, man?
I'm good.
Hey, it's a big day.
Welcome to the SEC.
Yes, it's a big day. It was the schedule. It's impressive. It's going to be tough, but it's going to be fun. I'm very much looking. I've been going to too many Iowa States and Kansases, and so it's going to be a little different.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot different. I made the statement today during our Oklahoma show that I'm going to have to kind of slap myself every weekend because I'm going to think of these as non-conference games, and I'm going to have to remind myself, oh, that's a conference game.
Yeah, I know.
They're going to seem like non-conference games.
Yeah, they will. But yeah, the OU, the interesting, obviously Bama that's going to be that'll be like the biggest home game I think that OU's had probably since the 2000 Nebraska. I mean, the excitement of a game. I don't know if OU will be on their level yet, but the excitement of a game. I think that Nebraska, it's probably been that long that I can think of a game that it's going to be so look forward to. But it also kind of depends. We don't know when these games are, and you might go, "Oh gosh, that may determine they have LSU and Auburn, then Bama. Oh, that might be so we may, but we don't know until the order because you just that murderer's row. You just never what you're going to get hit. But I also like the interesting of Josh Heupel coming back to Norman.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool, and everyone loves Josh.
Yeah.
But it was a bitter. It was the hardest firing Bob's ever had to do. And I don't know if Josh. I think he's little bitter. So that'll be fun because he was such a legend. But it's I don't know. It'll be and then Beamer coming back. He was an OU guy, and then probably won't happen. But if Rattler did decide to stay, he would be eligible. He had one more year. That would I don't know if he'll do that. But
that would be fun.
That would be interesting to see Rattler because the COVID year didn't count, so he would have another year. He would. He actually could play too if he really wanted to. I did. I like that guy before me. Is he a Florida fan? Is that what that guy is?
Oh, the guy before you?
Yeah. What fan is he?
He's a Kentucky fan.
Kentucky. Okay, I knew it was one of those SEC East. He mentioned it. Texas will host Georgia before the Aggies ever do. Because the Georgia goes to Texas in 24, and A&M will still not have hosted Georgia. And what have they been there, 10 years now?
Yeah, so that's going to be the 24 season is going to be their 13th season.
And they've
so
never
it's going to be their 14th season before they host. Yes, that's crazy.
And Texas will still host Georgia before A&M because A&M doesn't get them that year. They won't get them.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to guess they're going to flip the games, I think, for 25, and then I don't know what they're going to do past that. But yeah, it's yeah. So and then, but also the interesting OU and Texas played none of the same teams. None of them. They're all different.
Well, yeah, they wanted everyone to see at least one of those two. Correct? Yeah.
Yes. That's quite different because we've played the same teams for since for 17 years or whatever, since 90. Well, more than that. Oh yeah, 96, I guess.
Well, Sooner throw on a good exercise, I think, for Oklahoma and Texas fans would be to take this year's conference schedule and take whomever you think is the best team, second best, third, and rank them 1 through 9, and then put that against whoever you think is the best, second best, third best in 2024 and see how more difficult you believe the schedule is.
I don't have to do much of ranking. I know it's going to be harder. I mean, going to Baton Rouge will be that'll be a game I'll like to. I'll watch it. I don't really think there's some road games I might. I'm not sure that's one I want to do. Those people are crazy. I don't know. But the Mississippi, that might be one that I might. That's a cool place to see a game, and there's kind of a connection Levy to Lane Kiffin and
yep.
Plus, I think it's a game it's going to be a hard game, but I think we'd have a decent shot. I don't like our chances in Baton Rouge, but and I suppose, but at least the only thing is the Texas game counts as a home game, so we only get 3 home games. But then that'll flip the next year in Texas. That's the only. But hey, it is what it is, I guess. But it does help for recruiting because because our biggest game was always Texas, and the recruits are it's hard. They're not on the campus. Granted, they may be at the home team, but now we have home games against just these massive programs that they can only help. And we're already getting some of those guys from those areas already because of it.
So you make a great point there with the home away with Oklahoma and Texas, because of course with 9 games in the Big 12,
another big reason I want 9.
Yeah, it's 4-4-1 versus this 3-4-1. So you always have that disadvantage or advantage.
I guess Georgia and Florida, they have the same. I'm assuming they.
Yes.
Yeah, they only have now. I don't know if that's the case this year, but starting next year, I don't know. No, that probably is though, because they only play 8, so probably is. They only get, and just for Oklahoma City and Norman, just getting another home game against a program like a Florida or something, that it'll just be so much bigger than even though Iowa State, they're decent, but it's the same over and OU. I mean, it's not that, he's done a nice job, but Oklahoma, it's just, we're like 90-10 against them. So it's not a a game that's really, but you have Florida coming in, every game is going to be, and the fans, I mean, it's going to be different because they only allow 5, I think they only sell like 5,000 Big 12, and OU usually gets about half those back. Where the SEC, it's 10,000. There won't be none back probably almost every game, except maybe Vanderbilt or something.
Yeah, so take what you just said. Let's take Oklahoma in its heyday, not all time, but 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And, certainly some teams in the Big 12 would jump up and give them a
Yeah.
really good
Sure.
game. And typically their typical season, of course, was 8-1. That was kind of their penciled in. They would lose to somebody and go
Right.
8-1 most of the time. But there would be those
We had,
Texas Tech games, and there would be those
yeah.
West Virginia games, or fill in the blank, whoever
Or
was
Baylor, we
down.
got way behind Baylor and had to make a
Yeah, whoever was down at
comeback.
the time that
Yeah.
you could kick around and not really look at that schedule, look at that game on the schedule as being a threat. Whereas this schedule,
Every game. I mean,
every game,
is
unless
you don't.
Missouri's down,
Yeah, Missouri be the only one that's a little, and it's a road game, so it won't be simple.
unless
And
Auburn's still down. But
yeah,
even
but
when
it's a road
Auburn's
game. I mean,
down,
any road game,
yeah,
the SEC, I think those are games that are very winnable, but they are not like you're not going to, it's different. And you've seen it through. I mean, the SEC. You see some of these times that these. I mean, like how Auburn 2 years ago, they should have beat Alabama. That was a terrible Auburn team.
yeah,
And they should have beat them. I mean, they should have. And that's not the first time. I mean, there's been some very average.
absolutely.
You don't. It's just the emotion and particularly when we go on the road. I mean, these programs are. I mean, they're just going to want to just you're welcome to the SEC, and it don't matter who we're going to be playing. I do think that we will be good enough to win. Other than against the top big boys on the road, I don't give us much chance, and even at home. But any other game, I think we're gonna have a good solid. But it's not going to be like, well, you just kind of show up and then Caleb Williams pulls the ball away from a running back when he fumbles, and somehow we beat Kansas. We're not gonna. You do anything like that, you'll get blown out on the road if you act like
Yep.
that.
All right, Sooner Thrawn. The calls are piling up, so we're
right,
going to
man.
move along here. But it's good to hear from you, and good to see you. And thanks for calling in.
All right, man. Have a good one. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. And it's good always to get a Big Ten perspective. It's especially good to get an Ohio State perspective on just anything because, I can't always deliver that. So we go to our buddy David Greenshield to do just that. David, how you doing tonight?
I'm here for you, Mark. As always, I'm here for you, man.
Absolutely, you are.
You know what I was thinking about with the Ohio State schedule? I didn't get a chance to comment this on the Big Ten, and I'm going to go to the SEC schedule here. But the 2024 schedule with the Big Ten, I think the Buckeyes really lucked out with that, by the way. Did you see that their 2024 schedule, by the way?
I did. It doesn't come to mind, though, right this second. Give it to me.
Yeah, because they did not get SC, in that year, which I think is going to be, really, really helpful, first year of the, with having to do that. So I think that's, pardon me while I pull it up here, but
well, they've got Illinois
I
and
think
Northwestern.
Right. They've got some cupcakes in there. That's where I was going with this. I think they may have lucked out with the scheduling that year. Because I was going to say that, with obviously the merging of the two conferences, that, they could have gotten UCLA, they could have gotten USC, so which would not have been, well, we'll see how good, UCLA would be. But, yeah, I mean, that's something that I think they got very, very fortunate on.
Okay, David, I'm looking at, and again,
Yeah,
we'll get to the SEC here in just a second, but I'm looking at
I'm going to go
Southern
to
Miss,
it too.
Western Michigan, and Marshall. Is there non-conference games? Okay,
Yeah, the non-conference is
oh Lord,
completely weak.
That's yeah. I'm gonna have to jump on the Buckeyes for that one. I'm gonna have to lash out, but we'll do that at another time. So,
well, go ahead.
So no USC.
Right.
I don't. Otherwise, I don't see where it's that light of a touch. There's no USC. There's no Wisconsin.
Right.
And those are the only schools that we almost know are going to be good to great.
Well, that's where I was coming from, Mark. They don't get a major non-conference opponent, and they don't get anybody in crossover in Big Ten, and then they don't get USC or UCLA, coming into the conference in their first year. So that's where I was going on the light part of it. I mean, obviously, they're still going to get team up north, and they're still going to get Penn State. But I tend to agree. Although I will say this, and this is going to go into the SEC. You know who they pick up a non-conference coming down the road?
Alabama.
They're going to have to do a home and home with Georgia and Alabama and Texas down the road as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
they should.
Imagine a schedule in a year where they get Texas or Texas or Georgia in non-conference, or Alabama, Texas, Georgia, or Alabama in non-conference, and then have to play the team up north, Penn State, and maybe USC in conference. Now that's a schedule.
That's what these teams are going to have to face that we're talking about right here in the SEC.
Well, I agree. So as a person that's, for strength of scheduling, that's what you put a lot behind when it comes to your top 25 that makes sense. I take it one Mark Rogers is excited to see how this plays out going forward.
I think that that the playoff committee is going to have a number of other factors to deal with that are more. Anytime you expand the field, there's more options. So when there are 4 spots, there's usually 5 or 6 considerations. With 12 spots and really 11, because the group of 5 should be pretty well targeted, as there's always one group of 5, almost always one who has distinguished itself, that with 11 spots, there's going to be more like a field of 16 or 17 that have some type of argument. So there's going to be more argument points to deal with.
Right. Now, again, neither one of us are a fan of 12-team playoff. We've both been on record as saying that. I think we're both.
Yes.
We'd have been more open to 8 for sure, but 12, yes. I think we both agree was too much.
It's not too much for me. It's the wrong number of teams. That's my issue.
Okay.
I don't want buys.
But you were more of a fan of 8 from when we talked about it, though, before, I thought.
Yes, because there aren't buys. Not because it's 8, but because there aren't buys. I would be a fan of 16, but I just think it's unrealistic in this modern age to expect these athletes to look at their pro careers and measure that against, it's really not that many more games than 12. And I'm on record as saying many times, we'll see how this plays out when a particular player is looking at 4 games to win a national championship, thinking, is it worth it?
You know what you're going to see, Mark? Somebody had pointed this out. I don't know if you already have. With this many playoff spots, if teams feel they already have a spot kind of locked up, do you see what you see maybe in the NFL with, players sitting, or anything like that?
Yes. I don't think it's going to be frequent, but sure. Tennessee plays Vanderbilt to close the season, and that may continue. They always have. Well, they just came off a 10-2 season in which they would have been in the playoffs, and they beat Vandy the last game of the season, I think 65-0 or 59-0. Well, they're going to be sitting players even earlier than they did this particular season.
Boy, that line between pros and college, is no longer blurred. Like I said before, it's basically the same.
Yeah, I don't like to hear that, but you're right.
I mean, you like I told you before, you've expanded the playoff, you've got NIL for compensation, and you have a transfer portal, which is basically quasi college football free agency.
And you have conferences that now maybe the NFL is more regional. Now, obviously, the fandom of the sport doesn't care about the divisions, and nobody's just locked in on their division. So it's a national sport when it comes to the attention But in terms of the way it's structured by the divisions, now the NFL is regional. It's keeping to its regional status that makes
Right.
sense. And college football is the one that's all over the place. The Dallas Cowboys playing in the NFC East is about the only aberration from a regional, uh, what makes sense regionally. And of course, longtime NFL fans are used to that. That's gone back for 50 years. So they're used to that. But everything else makes sense in the NFL, and it does not in college football.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we obviously get on here and complain about the direction that college football's coming, and we've done that probably way too much as it is. But yeah, it's just obviously going to be a totally different sport. I did want to comment on the SEC schedule, Mark. I just boy, I just keep on thinking, are Texas and Oklahoma? I know you just had an Oklahoma fan. Are they ready, boy, they better be ready, I guess, huh? That Oklahoma schedule did look really interesting that first year, didn't it?
Yeah, so it's up top on the screen
Yeah,
here with Alabama, South Carolina, and Tennessee at home. So if that's this last season, Oklahoma would be lucky to be 1-2 in those 3 games. They might
yeah,
be 0-3. And then Auburn, LSU, Ole Miss, and Missouri, they'd be lucky to be 2-2, and they would have the possibility of being 0-4. And of course, they lost to Texas. So yeah, that's probably a 2-6 season
yeah.
this past year.
See, I think I'm wondering what do you think the magic number? See, we always we keep on comparing to the NFL. Usually, like in the NFL, we think what's going to be the magic number to get into the playoff. Like in the NFL, you think you have to go 9-8 at least, maybe 10-7. Now with it being a 17 game schedule, we're going to see a fair amount. You think so? We'll see some 9-3s. Mark, you ever think there's a chance we'll see some 8-4s get in?
Well, our buddy, the real MVP, was the first caller, and he served that up because of two possibilities or two arguments, 2 points. And
Hmm.
one is that the SEC has dominated the playoffs. So even though the committee tells us that they don't factor in previous history, whether that's a particular team or the conference, they do.
Hmm.
There is no way that they are able to separate themselves from the SEC's dominance in the playoff era. And I believe that off the top of my head, somebody can add it up. I was in the process of adding it up. It's like 14-4.
Yeah.
So if that continues, and then there is a team that plays a treacherous schedule, things
Yes.
fall in line for them where Alabama's number 1 in the country and Georgia's number 3, and they play well in those losses.
Yeah.
And they also play, a la Georgia annihilating Oregon 2 years ago out of conference, and then Oregon goes on and plays in the Pac-12 championship game. If they've got that kind of resume where they've lost to 4, let's say top 10 or 12 teams in the nation, well, in close games, and then they beat somebody out of conference that like is a conference champion,
Yeah.
like Florida did last year against Utah.
What do you yeah, it's just gonna be interesting. You probably have done analysis on this, Mark, the kind of how those teams from, like, I think we mentioned it before, like 10 through like 15,
Yes.
that bunch in there.
Yeah, I've gone through it, and I would love to do again. I'm not good at keeping a database. That's the next step here at the Voice of College Football. Behind the scenes, keep a database. Yeah, go through each season and yeah, lay out the 12-team playoff and how it would have been, reviewed by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. And what I remember is this is going to be an interesting portion of this, David, is
Yeah,
what I kept hitting was how is the committee going to evaluate losing conference championship games? Because there would be these 10-2 teams out there that would be safely in the playoff the week before as the
right.
number 11 team in the country. Then they lose a conference championship game and they're 10-3. And you match them up against 10-2 teams. Well, should they be penalized for typically losing to a team that's a top 5 or 8 team in the country?
Well, I mean, everybody's going to be trying to jockey for those buys, though, Mark. I mean, I guess that's
Sure.
at the point where you're just playing for seeding, and trying to get the buys. Which I'm that, by the way, I just think 8 is the ideal number, but I'm also in agreement with you that I'm not a fan of buys either. By the way,
But at least they did the buys in a manner in which I would have done them
yeah.
with the conference championships, because they're awarding conference championships, and then they're also giving returning value back to the conference championship games.
By the way, just catching the eye, that Tennessee schedule looks interesting too.
Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi State, Florida, Kentucky, Georgia, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Vandy. Yeah.
Yeah, that looks real interesting.
Yeah.
They got to go on the road to Georgia and then to Oklahoma.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
that's a tough draw, but at the same time, they're already playing Georgia and Alabama every year as it stands right now.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Then because they just okay, so they added Oklahoma. I guess the thing about it is they do have to go to Norman though. That first year
Mhm.
is going to be interesting, like the Oklahoma fan was talking about. Hey, I know you got other callers, but last thing real quick, as I put in the Ohio State chat, I will be ready for the Team Up North fans when you bring up the 2016 JT Barrett got the first down game, I will add, whenever you're ready to do that.
Okay, we're going to put that together soon, David, as well as the 2003 Fiesta Bowl.
Okay.
We're going to take that in.
Well,
In the
bring in
next
all
few weeks.
27 of your Miami caller, or we got 27 of those call-in shows for Miami fans.
Something like that. I lose track, but
Yeah.
it's something in that range. And yes, we will take that on. And also, based on a conversation I had with somebody the other day, I sent you an email that you may want to look out for.
Okay. I'll look for that, and then you just let me know the time and the place, my friend.
Thank you, David. Appreciate
All
the
right, Mark.
call.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye. Our man, David Greenshield. We had some other callers on here. Hopefully that we'll be able to call back soon. I apologize for the wait, but we got our guy Jackson checking in tonight. Jackson, what's going on?
Oh, it's going pretty good. I just got done getting this little magazine today.
Nice.
Getting the summer ready.
Absolutely.
Then I just got waited out for that Phil Steele magazine, make my order for that.
Yeah. We heard back from Mr. Phil Steele the other day, so we believe we'll be able to get him back on here this summer.
Oh, man, it's going to be amazing, as always. And I'm looking at the schedules, right? So Thank goodness we're going to keep Alabama, Tennessee. I mean, obviously we're going to keep Alabama, Auburn, but thank goodness we're keeping Alabama, Tennessee, and Auburn, Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss. Now, there were some people that were worried about what was going to happen to LSU, Ole Miss. They're like, oh, no, what's going to happen to the Magnolia Bowl? And there's a few others that are staying. Arkansas, Texas A&M, that's a pretty good one.
Yep.
And Florida, Tennessee staying for another year, but thank goodness we're going to see Texas and Texas A&M, the Lone Star Showdown, return in 2024 at the 12th man. And we're going to see Texas, Arkansas in a rematch for the first time since 2021. But for the first time since 1991, we're not going to see Georgia, South Carolina.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean,
Well
I bet
put. Yep.
South Carolina's pretty happy about that for sure.
If I could just choose one game, this is the one that stands out to me. In addition to Texas A&M, obviously amazing rivalry that needs to be back in college football, and so gladly it is. But Georgia at Texas.
Ooh, that's in addition to having Michigan on your schedule as well. That's scary. And let's talk about LSU's schedule for a little bit. Holy cow, it's tough. So they're going to have Bama coming to their backyard. Then they got to go Florida, Texas A&M, and Arkansas. we hadn't even gotten started with the non-conference rivalry. They're going to have that Vegas neutral site game against USC, and they're going to play UCLA at home. They're not going to have to go to Rose Bowl like they did in 2021. But Florida's schedule was what really caught my eye.
Hey, just a second, Jackson, before we move on to Florida. LSU is playing USC and UCLA in the same season?
Yes.
That's crazy. I didn't notice that.
It's okay.
Huh.
Yeah. But
interesting.
But, if they go 10-2 with that schedule, that could help them get into the playoffs with a 12-team setup.
Now, see this LSU schedule before we move on to the Gators. They always play Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Arkansas. So those 4 are no change to what they're used to.
Yep.
They've got Florida still there. Let's say the South Carolina game would serve as what used to be that rotation just coming up on South Carolina. So basically they've picked up Vanderbilt and Oklahoma in place of Auburn and Mississippi State. That's what the trade-off is. If you add all that together, they've traded Auburn and Mississippi State for Oklahoma and Vandy.
Yeah, that's pretty big right there. Florida's got a really big schedule right there. Of course, they're still doing the Georgia game. Thank goodness for that. But they have to go on the road to Tennessee and Texas. And they got Mississippi State on the road. They got LSU, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Kentucky at home. But the non-conference schedule, of course, they're playing Florida State on rivalry week.
Yep.
But guess who else is on there? Miami and Central Florida.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great schedule. Not for Billy Napier, but for us.
Yeah.
You've looked into this, Jackson. So I always appreciate you keeping us updated on future schedules here. So Florida plays. That's tremendous. Florida State, Miami, and UCF in the same season.
Yep.
And I will back off on my criticism of Florida football having not traveled out of the state for a non-conference game, neutrals, or a true road game since 1991. I will do that in favor of that crazy schedule.
What'd you say, Mark?
That is tremendous. I'm just saying that I am going to lay off of Florida and my criticism of the Gators that I bring up from time to time when talking about scheduling, having not gone on a true road trip since 1991 to Syracuse, outside the state of Florida.
Well, they definitely will by going to Utah to start off this year.
Yes.
So that,
but this what you just outlined with this crazy UCF, Miami, and Florida State non-conference schedules, I love that.
Well, and Georgia's schedule, they're going to have Clemson to start off the 2024 season. And, of course, they'll have Georgia Tech on there. And we're looking at Auburn's non-conference schedule. It's a little bit easier. But Texas, in addition to playing Michigan, they're going to have Louisiana Monroe. And from what I found out, so I'm guessing it's going to be the only easy game for LSU. It's the University of Nicholas.
Is that the old Nicholls State?
No, just Nicholas for right now, I guess.
What is that?
Beats me.
The University of Nicholas?
Yeah. I don't
Folks out there, fill us in on that. Who in the world is that? The University of Nicholas?
Maybe Nicholas State or Nicholas, but they're from the state.
That's got to be Nicholls State.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just like, we gotta make this like a spring game. Like the FBS, FCS games be spring games. But oh well. But on the bright side, we're going to finally have LSU Oklahoma. We've waited for a couple decades for that to happen.
Yeah, that's cool. Rematch of the 03 BCS championship game. Thank you, Easy Money. I assumed it was Nicholls State. Yes, the championship game there in 03 in New Orleans. Yep.
Yeah. And Oklahoma, we don't know what their third and fourth non-con games are yet. Because right now they got Temple and Tulane, but they're going to have a rough road ahead of them. I'm just curious to see if LSU Arkansas is going to go back to rivalry week for 2024. Because we noticed that Oklahoma Arkansas isn't on the schedule. Kind of wish it was, but yeah, I agree with Tim. Brian Kelly's never won a big postseason game.
Never won a big postseason game in a decade. Yeah, I generally agree with that. Won a lot of second and third tier bowl games.
Yeah, especially last year. But maybe he'll win a big one this year. Maybe he won't. But history says Brian Kelly's not going to win a big New Year's Six game. He can win the big regular season games, but he just can't get done in the postseason.
Well, they lost 2 college football playoff games to Clemson and Alabama. They lost the BCS championship game in 2012 to Bama. They lost a Fiesta Bowl to Ohio State. And I don't know of any other New Year's Six game that they reached. So he must have went 0-4.
Well, and he lost the 2009 Orange Bowl against Virginia Tech when he was at Cincinnati.
Oh, yes.
So there was that. And he skipped town.
I was counting Notre Dame, but yes.
Oh, it's okay. He skipped town before the 2010 Sugar Bowl, Florida. So he's like, I'm not staying here at Cincy.
Yeah, that was brutal. And he, of course, skipped town before the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State.
Yeah. He didn't want to be at the Fiesta of the Siesta against Oklahoma State.
I'm a little kinder to Brian Kelly than many are. I think he's a good coach.
And that's a wonderful quality, man.
I think that I don't know where I had him. I actually didn't release coaches' rankings this year, did I? I'm going to have to do that. Last year, I had him around number 8, something like that.
Well, it's a very kind ranking.
Well, who are you ranking ahead of Brian Kelly?
Well, I'll have to do my coaches pretty soon.
Bring them on and let us know, Jackson, and we'll compare notes. And I guess I've got to do my coaches' rankings as well.
Yeah. They may be same as yours. I'm not sure. But it'll be fun going over them. And Missouri, though, they got a good little setup. The non-con's a little easy for them. They got Boston College, Buffalo, Murray State, and Massachusetts. Real winners, right? But
yeah, so they've almost made their way to a bowl game based on those 4 games.
So all they really got to do is get those. Let's see. They got Vanderbilt at home and South Carolina on the road. Vanderbilt's been going up a little bit with Clark Lee. And
yeah, that schedule, and I know we're forecasting way out. We haven't even played 2023, and we're talking about a 2024. And college football, things happen so fast and change so fast. But Missouri has basically been a 500 team under Eli Drinkwitz. That looks like a 2-6 conference schedule and record for Mizzou.
Yeah. So from what we're seeing, 2024 is a test to see where things are for the future. And then when it's like over, everybody in the SEC is going to go, so are we doing 8 games or 9 games?
Mizzou is the classic example of why a lot of folks in the SEC want to stay with 8 conference games to ensure more bowl teams. They are the perfect example of that.
Yeah. I saw that Bama wanted to stay at 8 games. That really doesn't make me too happy because I kind of want to see Auburn and Tennessee stay for good. But once again, I'm happy that Bama, Tennessee staying in 2024. So there's that. And I noticed that Bama has to go to Wisconsin. So that's going to be a really good one.
Yes.
And looking at Tennessee's schedule, they got an easy non-conference schedule with the exception of North Carolina State. But that conference schedule looks really tough. They got Bama and Florida at home, Kentucky, Mississippi State at home, and they got to go to Georgia, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's not as easy as they look, but Tennessee showed us that they're gonna beat down Vandy, of course, like they did 2022. But who knows? And what do you think about all this, Mark?
Well, I want to go back to the format as soon as we get done with some calls here. I want to go back to the format because, again, this got released at 7:00 Eastern, and I had 3 consecutive shows. So I'm looking at schedules, but I want to see what the system is. I'm going to go through the system as soon as we get off the line here. So anything else, Jackson?
That's about all. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you calling, man. Always good to see you.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Have a good night, Jackson.
You too, Mark.
It's our guy, Jackson Johnson. Always all over college football, Jackson is. And I always enjoy Jackson's different news and notes and tidbits that he brings to the table in joining our various shows. So what I wanted to get to is the formula here. So we just witnessed what the Big Ten put together last week, which to me, and I have been about as critical of schedules as anybody around. I have torn up the SEC schedule for years. And again, that's a conversation for another time. And it's a conversation that I have outlined numerous times as to why the SEC schedule made no sense and why they butchered their schedule format. And it could have been easily corrected. The ACC, the same thing. Now, the ACC did a marginal job in correcting its schedule, going from their SEC-like schedule. They had the same exact scheduling model as the SEC, and now they've corrected it somewhat, but they still went with a very cookie-cutter 3-6-6 model that corrects a few issues, but not as effectively as the Big Ten. So I'm not going to go through the Big Ten because we're focused on the SEC here, but certainly look at the various live streams we've done the last few days and my comments on the Big Ten schedule. Check out the Big Ten live show that we produced on Monday night. That's where I dived into the format that the Big Ten has unveiled, which again, I think is near masterful. I don't know what they could have done better. All right. The SEC. And again, please call the show. We have left the link in the comments section. Home and away designations in 2024 were built with the provision that no school will travel to the same location to which it traveled in 23. Why? I don't know. Why does that matter? Okay. Somebody would have to explain that to me. Somebody in the SEC office, preferably. The opponents were determined based on 2 primary factors: traditional opponents and balance of schedule strength. Good. Okay, that makes sense. We want to protect rivalries and we want to build as equitable of a schedule and as fair a schedule as possible. Great criteria, makes sense. But this whole, who cares? You're breaking from the past. You are building a schedule for the future. Who cares who went where in 2023? big deal, doesn't matter, whatever. That if that got in the way of making valuable and effective decisions in 2024, then that is stupid. That is a stupid provision to make unless it can be accommodated, because I know that they're I guess looking out for different fan bases that don't want to show up at the same locale 2 years in a row. Okay, whatever. That I just think that's stupid. Again, if it could be accommodated and without getting in the way of other priorities, fine. But that's for that to be front and center bullet point number 1, that no school will travel to the same location to which it traveled in 2023. Who cares? Doesn't matter. All right. Next point here. Balance of schedule strength was based on each school's conference winning percentage since the SEC last expanded in 2012. Okay, that's realistic. I've got generally no issues with that. Basically, these programs have stayed generally the same throughout, except, of course, Tennessee upward trajectory, Texas A&M pretty flat line despite a down season this past year, still pretty flat line. Tennessee's surging upward, it appears, only one big season, so let's not get carried away with ourselves and place Tennessee in the elite status. Okay, it looks to be headed in the right direction. Florida has probably been the most inconsistent team in the SEC since 2012. Will Muschamp was the coach in 2012, and Florida went to the Sugar Bowl. And Florida actually had, because Notre Dame had no business playing in the BCS championship game other than being undefeated, they were not good enough to be there, and Ohio State was on probation. Actually, Florida came this close to playing in the BCS championship game that year. But then, Florida's had 2 4-win seasons in the last 10. Then they rode the wave of Dan Mullen, 3 consecutive New Year's 6 bowl wins. And then, of course, now we will see what they have got going forward, but 2 consecutive 6-7 seasons, and it does not look good for Billy Napier here in 2023. Or yes, that's what year we're in, 2023. So I don't have an issue with that. I would have an issue with that bullet point there, that condition, if there were programs that were decidedly different today than they were in 2012. Georgia was great in 2012. They're even greater now. Alabama was great in 2012. They're great now. Auburn and Florida would be the 2 teams that are considerably different today than they were in 2012. But it's not even that great a difference. Auburn, with some proper coaching and management by Hugh Freeze, could be back in contention quickly. So could Florida. I don't know if Hugh Freeze is the guy to do it. I have more faith in Hugh Freeze than I do in Billy Napier at this point. But we'll get to that call in just a second, but I want to run through these points because the SEC screwed up point number 1, unless it doesn't affect anything meaningful. The balance of schedule strength going back to 2012, have no issue with that because of what I just outlined. The winning percentages for the performance of Oklahoma and Texas in the Big 12 since 2012 were included in determining 16 positions ranked by winning percentage. So Oklahoma, having played much better football since 2012 than Texas, is paying for it. Okay. This is not fair. This point right here, this balance of schedule strength, it's not fair. This is an NFL model. It shouldn't matter. I get it. I understand the concept. I understand the point. There's nothing about it I don't understand. I don't necessarily agree with it, though. Why should you be penalized for being good? Why should you be propped up for being bad? Why? Why? Next bullet point. Each school's schedule will include 4 opponents, 2 home, 2 away, whose winning percentage ranked among the top 8 conference winning percentages since 2012. Okay. All right. I guess what that ensures, that's going to happen almost automatically, but that just ensures that if you're Vanderbilt, then you're not playing the worst teams all the time, just because your winning percentage is so awful that you would play the very worst teams. And I guess that would be, they're not even bad teams, but Missouri, Ole Miss, Arkansas, and somebody else. You would play the worst teams based on your winning percentage. So it at least guarantees that you have to play somebody good. Okay. Also, each school's 24 schedule will include 4 opponents, 2 home, 2 away. Same thing, just the opposite. So that's what they're doing there. They are not completely punishing Alabama and Georgia. They're basically saying, we're not going to make you play LSU and Tennessee every week. You're going to get to play at least somebody. You get a break. So those 2 components somewhat slightly negate the point that I don't like. Okay. This is the SEC. Everybody's going to play a tough schedule. You don't have to manufacture a difficult schedule for your best teams. While no school will travel to the same location to which it traveled in 23, it should be noted that when a long-term schedule format is determined, it may not be possible to structure a schedule that does not include some schools playing at the same location in back-to-back years in the first years of a new format. Okay, that's fine. Absolutely. Appreciate you all being here. Let's take our next call. I believe we've got a Dan Beast Media here. Hello,
Good evening, everyone.
Randy, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. How are you? It's an exciting day today.
Fine. What's going on?
Nothing. I finished up my stream a little while ago, saw that you were on, and thought I just might pay attention, considering we're talking about the SEC tonight.
Would love to hear from you. What strikes you about the schedule?
Well, I mean, I haven't really gone through everyone else's schedule with a fine-toothed comb. But I have looked at Georgia, and I mean, from top to bottom, I absolutely will say it's a tough schedule. Others have used the word brutal. I don't know that I would, but others have. I mean, it didn't shake out. I took a stab at predicting who I thought we might see on the schedule, and it didn't shake out quite that way. I was surprised to see Tennessee on Georgia's 24 schedule. And I was actually, I mean, you could have flipped a coin. I had gone with Oklahoma instead of Texas, and I had Oklahoma or Georgia going to Oklahoma in 24. So they're still on the road, but they're taking on the other newbie. And I had Alabama on the schedule, but I had them coming to Athens because they haven't been to Athens since 2015. And, Texas and Georgia were supposed to play in 28 and 29, but that game got canceled with with them coming into the league. And I just thought that since the Oklahoma game was closer on the future schedules, that maybe they would just plug Oklahoma in there, and they didn't. But that's fine, whatever. And of course, Georgia opens the season with Clemson. They finished the season with Georgia Tech, so 2 non-con Power 5 games. They get Florida and Auburn, which were mandatory from a Dogs fan point of view. They get Kentucky on the road and Ole Miss away. I don't know. I guess just the fact really that Tennessee's on there, that's kind of surprising to me. I really thought that game might be South Carolina, not Tennessee, because traditionally Tennessee is not a Georgia rival. It's a great game. And since we went into divisions, they've played every year. That is not a traditional school rival, though. That would be Florida, Auburn. And given what was left, if you took Tennessee, Kentucky, or South Carolina, I could probably see either Kentucky or South Carolina being, if you had three, say, permanent rivals, being that third team, but certainly not Tennessee. So to see Tennessee on there was probably my biggest surprise.
Okay. So to me, this is what makes it difficult. So as you know, Georgia plays Auburn every year in the current format. Then they play everyone in the East, and they rotate against the other teams in the West. So let's say Mississippi State would be Georgia's rotational team to play out of the West. You're taking Texas, Alabama, and Ole Miss. They're playing those three teams in place of Missouri, Vanderbilt, and South Carolina.
Correct, which is why some people say this is a very difficult schedule.
Yep.
I don't feel that way. I'm someone, I say line them up. Let's go. Play them all.
Well, that doesn't mean it's not a difficult schedule, though. I'm
sorry?
That doesn't, just because you're looking forward to playing these games doesn't mean it's not a difficult schedule.
Oh, no. Like I said, it's a difficult schedule.
Yeah.
I just don't know that I would go so far as to say brutal. Some people did. Because if you look at the 5 games that are outside of Athens, you have the 4 true road games. Then you have the game that we play in Jacksonville against Florida, which is technically a home game. But, obviously you're traveling. That's a different discussion, whether that game should be there or not. But when you look at the 5 games that they're not between the hedges, I mean, that's a tough row to hoe. And then when you are home, you still play the likes of Tennessee, Auburn, So I just say, play them all. I have no fear. I know that there were some Georgia fans earlier today with leaks about Texas and Alabama being on the schedule and both being road games. They had something to say about that. And I'm just not in that camp at all. I just think line them up, let's play them. That's what I want to see. I want to see us play them. And whether it's a 9-game schedule or an 8-game schedule, they're going to play every team in the league inside a 4-year window, home and away anyway. So we're going to see all of these teams. But now, like, not seeing, say, South Carolina more often is going to take some getting used to. I do think that if they switch this to a 9-game schedule in 25, which I think is a real possibility, and they do choose to go with the pod option, which seems to make the most sense, where you have 3 permanent rivals and you rotate the others, then I think you're going to see Auburn, Florida. And I've said for a while now, I think that game would be Kentucky as the 3rd permanent rival. And then everyone else will just roll through. So, yeah, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult because the SEC is the best conference. It's going to be difficult because of just who we're playing and where we're playing them. And we don't even know the devil of the details, which is when do we play these games? How does it stack up? Are you doing back-to-back road games? Stuff like that. So it is a very challenging schedule, but I am in no way daunted, and I'm certain that the boys in Athens aren't either.
The only component here that would make this schedule more difficult would be to take, let's say, LSU and Oklahoma. They're the 2 best teams if everything stays the same. Now we're looking at 2 years in advance, right. But if everything stays the same, LSU and Oklahoma, and replace Mississippi State and, I guess, Kentucky. And I don't know that Oklahoma and LSU over the last couple of years are that much better than Mississippi State and Kentucky, but we expect them to be. So that would make it more difficult. Otherwise, you're playing most of the best teams in the conference.
Yeah. I mean, it is absolutely challenging. So for all those people out there who like to try to poke fun at 23 and the schedule that we had to play, obviously that will not be an arrow in the quiver in 24. But I mean, that's ridiculous anyway, but that's another thing. It's just the Alabama game could have been LSU. That's a money game. That's a TV game. If it were LSU, I mean, the thing about the conference is that only the SEC, through realignment and expansion, has managed to not only strengthen traditional rival games, but rekindle several along the way. No other conference has managed to do that. And they've also managed to keep within a reasonable footprint. So if you talk about travel inside the conference, nobody's going to cry for anybody in the SEC. Okay. But I could see how putting LSU on the road, putting Texas and Oklahoma also on the road in the same season for a team like Georgia would be asking a lot, because you're not going to go much further west. Okay. So again, nobody's crying over that, but those would be the longest trips that you would have to make. So Tuscaloosa, not bad, but they do have to go to Texas, right? So they're going to get one trip further west. And I think moving forward, for lucky, that's kind of what we'll see, is maybe you'll get LSU one year, maybe you'll get Oklahoma one year, but maybe you don't get them on the same, or Texas, but you don't get them both on the road in the same year. So, I mean, that's just conjecture, and who cares about fairness, right? But I would hope that maybe they would take that into consideration.
Well, I care about fairness, and based on the bullet points that we saw that the SEC unveiled, they care about fairness with the condition that they're going to protect the games that they believe need to be protected. And I'm all for that. I just see no reason why they have to have this kind of NFL schedule, this NFL type model of looking at winning percentages.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. I hate to just say it's one man's voice, but obviously Nick Saban had something to say about that, which was ridiculous.
Why would he want that?
Oh, no, what I mean is he was just, when he looked at the potential pods that were floated for a potential 9-game schedule, he didn't like who Alabama was rumored to play.
Yeah.
And so,
but he's being penalized by this. He and Kirby Smart are being penalized by having he specifically, because they have by far the best record in the conference since 2012. So they theoretically are going to play the toughest schedule based on what we just read.
Well, the other surprise, and what you just said reminded me that there's no Vandy on the Georgia schedule, is that actually is a bit of a surprise too. And I guess there I would say maybe Tennessee wouldn't be there and Vanderbilt would, right? To your point about leveling it out a little bit, or however you want to think of it. Because Georgia and Vandy, gosh, they've played as far back as I can recall, and that's just one of those games that, do I want to go to Nashville? Nashville's a fun visit. Probably Austin now is going to be the next best marquee visit for the Dogs if we have to travel, or it may replace Nashville. So just from a fan's point of view, not playing Vandy is kind of a bummer in that regard. But it's just one of those things where if they were looking to balance it a little, Vandy would have been on the schedule, right? So they're not, clearly. But again, you will never hear me say, woe is the person on the yacht. You know what I'm saying? That's just not going to be the case. I don't care. I want them to play the best games possible, and hopefully they can keep it fair. I mean, why would you want to beat up your top tier teams if you are in fact trying to get as many teams in the playoff as possible? But I don't think that really matters either. I'm not a fan of the playoff, but that's the future. That's where we're headed. So,
well, what would you do? What format would you implement?
Regarding the playoff, or just inside the conference? The playoff. I think I heard you say this earlier, and I think we agree. I mean, I'm fine with 4. I think 8 would have been fine. Once you get beyond 8, I just think you're going too far. Because you're not going to change. I just believe you're not going to change the outcome if you go past 8. I don't think it needs to be the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I think you need to have the teams there who have a legit shot to win. And I believe I've stated it here before. I think there's probably 8 to 10 teams in the country who can say that right now. So I don't think we need to get into those other teams other than for participation trophies. And I'm not trying to diminish anyone. I just think that if you're not going to make the investment to compete at that level and teams aren't, look at their budgets, then don't tell me that you want to be in the playoff just so you can recruit better.
Well, that's not a participation trophy. A participation trophy is when everybody gets a trophy for participating.
Well, but they do, because if you make the playoff, don't you go recruit off of that? Don't you fundraise off of that?
That's not a trophy. A trophy was when I took my kids to soccer and everybody got an award, regardless of how awful they were and how awful their teams were, and everybody got an award. No, teams have to earn a playoff spot. I don't like the 14 playoff because we've got too many conferences to have a 14 playoff. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, sure. Arguing for expansion is fine. Like I said, 8 is fine. I just don't know. I just don't know about the 12 team.
You make total sense. I'm not arguing that I believe that there are more teams that are capable of winning a national championship. I completely agree with you.
And that may rotate through. Like I said, say there are 10, right? I mean, you might have 4 that you consider locks, 4 that have the potential to be there consistently. And then you might have the other 2 that, based on whatever, rotate in and out of that top 10 that have the opportunity, right? If you will, say Georgia somehow messes it up and falls out of those top 10 and TCU slides in and they're the new 10th team or whatever. That's fine. But I just don't think you're going to have team 12, doing much damage in this thing. And we're going to be forced to listen to the debates about who should be in and who's not. And I mean, it makes for talking points in television, and that's fine. But, and I'm going to watch the playoff games. Don't misunderstand me. I want more football. Football's great, but I don't enjoy, non-competitive games. And who knows? We'll see how it plays out. But I just think also there's the whole devaluation of the regular season, which is probably the worst part of the whole thing for me when we're talking about the playoffs. But I hate to talk about the playoffs like that because, the schedule is the focus, but obviously the focus, those two things are tied together, right? This schedule is tied to that playoff. And when I look at the schedule, I mean, it comes back to what is your team in 24? Like if I look at my team, let's say Carson Beck, who I assume is going to start. I believe he will. I believe he will play very well. Georgia should have a good year. If all of those things happen, he might decide to go pro. And God bless him. That'd be great for that young man. He's put in his time. He's earned it. So if we flash 1 year forward, then Brock Vandegrift, assuming he continues his progression the way Beck has, would be essentially in the same boat as Beck is right now. Another year of learning, another year under the new system. He assumes the reins. So at the very minimum, you've got a new quarterback in 24 to go play this schedule. But if Brock transfers out, now maybe you have a sophomore in Gunner, or you have a true freshman in Raiola or Puglisi running the show. Think about this schedule with those dudes under center, right? It's not the 23 team that's going to be out there. The 24 team will be. The defense will still be great. The O-line will still be great. But there will be new changes. And this goes for everyone. But if I say, okay, Brock Vandegrift, go on the road and beat Alabama at Tuscaloosa, that's a tall task because we haven't seen him play. That's just the way we have to think about this. So it is a very difficult schedule. No Vandy, no South Carolina. I mean, if you look inside the conference, who do we assume Mississippi State is struggling in their second year under a new head coach? Or do they have it figured out? If we assume they're struggling, okay, maybe you look at Mississippi State as the softball. I don't feel Kentucky is a softball. Kentucky's a very physical team. They play very well under Stoops. Ole Miss is always dangerous. We're on the road. Lane Kiffin's offense is always a challenge. In fact, the only team that the Dogs haven't beaten under Kirby is Ole Miss. They got housed the last time they went out there. It was brutal. I mean, they lost like 45-10 or something with Jacob Eason at quarterback in 2016. So there are no softballs on this conference schedule as I see it, unless we're just going to poo-poo Mississippi State. Then you also have Clemson and you have Georgia Tech. And then whoever they end up scheduling, for the other two games out of conference, whoever is available or however they sort that. You might have a
you can also look at it this way. If in fact Mississippi State and Kentucky are the weaklings on the schedule, that is a relative statement, as you well know. You take them to any other conference and they are not Rutgers and they are not what Duke has been in the past. They are not Georgia Tech. They are not Virginia Tech right now. They are not Northwestern. They are not a whole slew of teams in every other conference. If those are the two worst teams on the schedule, and they are what they typically are, 7-5, 8-4 type teams.
Sure.
That's a tremendous schedule.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you, unlike, many who are in the chat or wherever, who want to just say, no, the leagues are the same. Obviously, you made a statement that they're not.
No.
And, it's ridiculous to assert such a thing, but people do it every day. And it's just one of those things where I've yet to have anyone tell me that they would trade even the 23 Georgia conference schedule for their conference schedule. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to do that. So, but yet, we don't play anybody, or we don't play 9 games,
which Randy is the Eastern Division, of course, Auburn, and then who is their other team in the West
this year?
Yes.
Oh gosh.
Is it Ole Miss?
It is Ole Miss at
Yes.
home. Yes.
Yeah. Nobody wants to trade. I would love. This will never happen, but I would love to experiment and send a mid-tier SEC team to, let's say, the ACC. I'd love to send Ole Miss to the ACC this year.
See what they would do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, but I don't need to laud the conference. I don't want to be that person, right? I just want to call it like I see it. And it's just tough. I mean, it's just a tough schedule. Like I said, the 5 outside of Athens is, that's a tough road to hoe. Anyway you cut it, it just is, because Auburn will not be the dumpster fire that they've been the last 2 years. No. They will improve. And Tennessee again is on the schedule when I thought maybe they wouldn't be. So we know they are on the come up. And in year 24, they will be better. This year, I expect them to take a bit of a step back. But in 24, given time to recruit, given the marquee player quarterback that they're going to have, Tennessee's going to be a real threat. Yeah, I mean it's just tough. It's a tough road to hoe. But again, I as a fan, I'm looking forward to the games. I'm excited about playing these teams. And you just have to wonder when we come down to who makes it to Atlanta. Like if it's so very difficult to project because we have no idea who the quarterback will be and so on and so forth. But if you look at this, you say, okay, whoever the 2 out of conference are, let's just give them 2-0. Georgia Tech 3-0. Okay. If we go down the rest of the schedule from here, based on nothing but blue chip ratio and, complete conjecture, moving forward, I don't know how many of those games that you're going to look at and go, that's a slam dunk victory. I mean, let's just, for the sake of argument, say Mississippi State. Okay, that's 4 wins. Do we see another one? I mean, is Florida going to be this awful again? Maybe. Okay, they're a mess. They're a real mess in Gainesville. Let's say 5. That's 5 wins. The rest of them, what do we call them? Dogfights, good games, competitive matchups. you know, I mean, it's going to be, they're going to earn their money. There's no doubt about it.
Well, Randy, thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate your insight. Always good to hear from you. Hope everything's going well.
It is. Yeah, it is.
All right,
There's
sir.
no point in getting into the rest of it. Y'all have a good evening.
Have a good night. Bye-bye. All right. Shoelace Sooner, thank you so much for the contribution. You know, we appreciate you. Thanks for doing the show, Mark. Best show on the internet. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for that. Then we've got our Michigan guy there. Thank you so much for that. Says Charisse Armistead, don't be a keyboard warrior. You seem to always have something to say about Michigan. Who's been your daddy back-to-back years? Call in. So a little punch counter punch there from Michigan and Charisse. And of course, Michigan making sure that everyone sees the counter punch. Yes, Charisse is a huge Buckeyes fan, and I don't want anyone to feel the pressure to call in. I would like a more diverse group of folks that watch us on a regular basis to call in. And certainly our buddy Joe Long, before we take our next call, Joe had made the statement that Ohio State is overrated. And I believe his earlier statement was the most overrated or something like to that effect. And I would just love Joe to call in and let me know how the team, the school with the best winning percentage of all time, the best winning percentage of the last 15 years, the last 20 years, the last 50 years is overrated. I don't know how they're overrated. Are they picked to win the national championship every year and they've only finished like number 3 in the country? So, but no, they're not picked to win the national championship every year. I don't know how they're overrated. But I would like that explanation. And then somebody asked Joe to call in, and Joe commented that the last time that he called in, I hung up on him. And yes, I'm hanging up on people left and right, as you can see. That is something that I probably let him rant on for like 28 minutes before I finally said, okay, you don't know what you're talking about, and hung up on him. Maybe that's what happened. I don't recall Joe ever calling. He says that he did. I would love for Joe, for you to call back and explain to us why Ohio State is the most overrated program. You may enlighten me in some way. All right, our buddy Tim stopping by. Tim, what's going on tonight? Tim, we can't hear you.
Now you can.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I just called it because I want to exercise this whole Brian Kelly's a good coach thing.
Okay.
We got to go through this, Mark, because you said this for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And you know what? Now, just maybe why do you feel Brian Kelly is a good coach?
Okay. Brian Kelly went to a MAC school. We'll place that aside. So his first decent sized coaching gig was at Cincinnati, and he succeeded with flying colors. The last team he took to the Sugar Bowl. Okay. Then he left for Notre Dame, and he elevated Notre Dame to its greatest height since Lou Holtz back in the early 90s. So he was able to elevate Notre Dame, and now he's moved on to LSU, and we will, the case is wide open there, but good early indications at LSU.
Okay.
Like, where would you rank Brian Kelly? I would rank him as a top 10 coach. I have ranked him as a top 10 coach in the country. What I
like about Brian Kelly is he's consistently wins the games he's supposed to win.
Yeah, he does.
You know what I mean? Like, he's just that guy.
Yeah.
You know, Brian Kelly, he's going to show up, and with the exception of a couple really bad years, you know, that he's had. He shows up, he wins the games that he's supposed to win.
Yes.
That's who he is. That's a good coach to me. He's a good coach, but that doesn't put him up in some higher level.
That's what I called him, a good coach.
Well, I mean, good coach is like there's dozens of good coaches.
Most of them are good coaches,
right? Okay, so then maybe I misunderstood you. That so you're not putting him like elite top 10 kind of coach.
No, I said he's a top 10 coach.
Oh, that's more than good, right? I mean, that's pretty elite. If you're like 10 out of 130, that means you're pretty up there.
Well, you can almost eliminate 70 or 80 just because they haven't proven they're either never going to elevate past a group of 5 level, or they have yet to prove. You know, they're somewhere out there lurking right now at Western Kentucky or Georgia Southern is the next great coach. Then we'll find that out 3 to 5 years from now. But otherwise, those guys will never elevate to his level by any stretch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here's my thing about when he was at Notre Dame.
Yep.
What do you his record against top
Yes.
top 5 opponents
Bad.
were? Huh?
It's bad.
Yeah, 0-4.
Awful.
But the weird thing about
Did you
0-4
see-
is in 10 years.
Yep.
That's the weird number. In 10 years, he played 4 top 5 teams. In
Okay.
10 years. You know, that shows you the
and
quality.
we're counting postseason.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think a couple
Then
of our
he played over his entire career at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm looking at this article.
So obviously they played Alabama in the playoff in 2020. They played Notre Dame in the playoff in 2018. Not Notre Dame, Clemson in 2018 in the playoff. So there's 2 right there.
Mm-hmm.
They actually, you could tack this one on, even though they technically were not in the top 5. They lost to Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, and then Ohio State finished number 3 in the country. They were like 6. And then that other game would have been the BCS championship game, which they got annihilated by Alabama in 2012.
Well, I mean, that's just it. He's 0 for New York 6. So when you say New York 6 and Brian Kelly, you just put an L next to that because the guy has never won.
He's 0-4.
And so that's bad. You know,
who else is winning those games though? There's only like 3 schools winning those games.
From 2010 through 21 when he left. I mean, it's a long time to be there and win. No, I mean, there's plenty of teams that are winning those bowl games. Heck, even Clay Helton won a New York 6 bowl.
Absolutely, he did.
Yeah,
but think of this, Tim. Going into last year's playoff, basically, this is the summary of the playoffs since the first year. The SEC beats everyone, and the only 2 teams that beat the SEC were Clemson and Ohio State. I've just summarized the playoff completely. Those are the only 3 components that win any playoff games are the SEC, Clemson, and Ohio State. That's it.
Those are want a playoff game?
Yes.
Oregon won.
I said from the first year going, yes. I eliminated the end years, but yes, Oregon won a playoff game. TCU won a playoff game. But basically, in terms of anything that matters, those are the 3. Those are the 3 components that have won anything that matters, because the other 2 got blitzed in the championship game. So those are the 3 that have won anything of consequence. The SEC, Clemson, Ohio State.
I didn't say
nobody else is doing anything.
I got you, but Mark, I didn't say playoff games. I said New York 6 bowls. That's not just the playoff games.
You only played in 1.
That's my point again. We're trying to say he's this great coach, and he hasn't won New York 6 bowls. He's so let's look at this. He's 4 so before LSU, he was 4-13 against top 10 teams.
Yes. What did he inherit?
That's abysmal.
What did he inherit?
He was there 11 years.
I understand, but what did he inherit? We can't just look at one. You're taking one slice of it. I'm taking another slice, which is there's a difference in inheriting Lincoln Riley from Bob Stoops at Oklahoma or Ryan Day from Urban Meyer at Ohio State versus what Brian Kelly inherited. Those are
there's leaps. Would you say that what Lincoln Riley got at Oklahoma was the same as what Ryan Day got at Ohio State?
No.
Okay.
But it's closer. It's closer than what Brian Kelly. He got a 6 or 7 win football team. That's what they were doing. They racked up a bunch of 7 and 6 seasons.
Mm-hmm. They had a couple of bad coaches, but remember also this is Notre Dame where they do win. Again, that's one of the schools. If you have a decent coach, they're going to win a lot of games. And he was there, and they won a lot of games. But the sticking point to me is look at all those games they won under Brian Kelly. They played 4 top 5 teams in all of that whole stretch, all all those empty wins he had.
He can't control that.
No, but he can control getting a team that when he does get against a top 10 team, that he goes better than 4-13 against them. Right?
I'd like to know where
He can
Clemson
control
was
that.
ranked in 2020. He won that game.
He beat Alabama last year, but then again, he turns around and loses at Texas A&M.
And he went to the SEC
which coach
championship
is he?
game.
Huh?
He got his team to the SEC championship game.
He beat Alabama, but he lost to Georgia. He lost to
He beat other teams too.
He got
won
destroyed
6
by
games.
He got
won
destroyed
6
by
games in the
Tennessee.
conference. Yes.
He lost at Texas A&M. What were they 5? They didn't even go to a bowl last year, did they?
No. I don't know of anyone who expected LSU to play in the SEC championship game last year.
Well, I don't think most people thought that Alabama would have the issues they had last year.
They were still one of the top 5 teams.
They were very good, exactly, but they found ways to lose the games they usually win. They lost by 1 point too. They beat LSU, beat it by 1 point. My point is, I'm not even talking about that. I'm trying to get through to my point is that I keep hearing from you that he's a top 10 coach, but I don't know many top 10 coaches that I know that are 4 and we'll say, well, hold on. So then last year he would have been what 1-2 or 1-3 because they lost to Florida State, right? Were they a top 10 team?
Well, it depends on if you're talking about at the time of the kickoff or at the conclusion of the game of the season.
Well, usually they do it at the time of the game, don't they?
Well, at the time of the game, Florida State was not ranked. That was the first game of the year. They beat Alabama, so notch that next to him. They were certainly ranked in the top 5 of the country.
Alabama, yeah, they were.
Yeah. So, okay. And they lost to Georgia.
All right. So let's say it's 2. So they went 1-2. So let's make it 6 and 15. Do elite coaches go 6 and 15 against top 10 teams?
Depends
6
who
and
they're
15?
coaching.
Huh?
Depends what teams they're coaching.
Okay, Notre Dame and LSU. So you're a head coach at Notre Dame and LSU, and you go 6 and 15 against top 10 teams. Is that elite?
Okay, you're spitting out numbers, which is something I do on a regular basis, but you also would have to name for me the coaches that are better than Brian Kelly. And then you would have to allow me the ability and opportunity to tell you why they're not.
So the fact that so
you say he's not in the top 10.
Just so I understand, it's irrelevant that at LSU and mainly at Notre Dame,
yes,
and LSU that he's gone. What is it? 5 and 15.
Yes,
against top 10 teams. That's irrelevant.
I didn't say it was irrelevant.
Okay. Well, why is he then?
I said that while you're telling me that he's not a top 10 coach, you need to bring to me the litany of coaches that are better than him because, and don't rank him number 11 to prove your point. He must be like 20 or 25 at least, if not worse, for you to be making this phone call and this point. So I don't know 25 coaches out there that are better than Brian Kelly.
Yeah. 25. There's at least, I would say there's at least 20 coaches better than him. I don't say name them off.
All right.
I'm literally looking. You are what your record says you are. You really are.
Yeah. And he also had to win the other games.
Yeah, but those are cream puffs. Those are cream puffs.
Not just because they're ranked in the top 5 in the country. Does it mean that they're cream puffs?
No, top 10. Top 10. Again, the top 5 is such a small sample.
I don't care about the rankings at the time of kickoff. I would have to go through the games themselves. You know, he lost a game against Georgia in 2017 when they eventually went on to come this close to winning a national championship. They lost by 1 point. You don't think he had his team prepared?
I'm not saying Brian Kelly hasn't had some good teams. And I'm not saying that Brian Kelly hasn't won some games. I'm just really not connecting the dots when I see that record against quality. I call a top 10 team a quality opponent. A top 10 team is a quality opponent. And it would be different if he was 500 or close to 500. but he's not. He's out of 20 games, he's won 5 of the 20 games against quality opponents.
I get it. I understand. I knew that before you called.
Okay.
But I'm not hearing the 20 or 25 coaches that are better than Brian Kelly. I can't find 25 coaches or 20 coaches out there that I would rather have coached my football team than Brian Kelly. I don't know who those guys are. It's not Steve Sarkisian. It's not.
No.
I don't know that I want James Franklin running my program ahead of
Kyle Whittingham or Brian Kelly.
I would love to pull up my rankings from this past off season. I believe I had Kyle Whittingham like 6th in the country. So yes, I had Kyle Whittingham ranked ahead of Brian Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 in the Pac-12 I would take over Brian Kelly. There's
really?
there's at least 4 or 5 in the
and they've accomplished more than Brian Kelly. You're talking about accomplishments, and you're going to tell me that they've accomplished more than Brian Kelly. Of course, you're saying Lincoln Riley, Kyle Whittingham.
That's a given.
I guess it's a given.
They're not in the same conversation. Those two.
You talk about losing a lot of big games in blowout fashion. Lincoln Riley's made a career out of that.
Really? How many blowouts is the biggest Lincoln Riley?
Well, anytime they play anyone on a national stage, for the most part.
What about going to the shoe?
They haven't looked great.
What about 2017 against Urban Meyer, going into the shoe and blowing them out?
I don't know if they blew them out. They were trailing in the 4th quarter. I don't consider that a blowout, but they won the game.
Score?
The final score was 31-16. If you watched the game, you knew it wasn't a blowout. But yeah, they won the game
by multiple touchdowns. Yeah,
yeah,
against number 2 Ohio State in the shoe.
Yeah.
I mean, he has some pretty good wins. He has a Cotton Bowl win.
Again, the point was about him being a top 10 coach, and I'm not hearing 20 coaches that are better than him. So when I say a coach is a top 10 coach, if you laid out your list of coaches and he was number 12, then that to me doesn't prove the point. 10, 12, 8. The last time I ranked coaches this past offseason, I clearly stated between like 7 and 15 was like that close.
If you're an AD, isn't part of your criteria is your ability to actually beat the elite teams, not just win the games you're supposed to win. So we started a conversation because you'll have no argument from me.
There's very few people doing this. Who else is doing this? Like 4 coaches. Jim Harbaugh wasn't doing it until Jim Harbaugh still, aside from Ohio State, Jim Harbaugh had a similar record to what you just outlined Brian Kelly having against top 5 and 10 teams. So what are we saying about Jim Harbaugh now? Yeah. That he's a great coach.
I mean, if you go a great coach over like 1 or 2 seasons, Jim Harbaugh goes like this. He's like he was up at Stanford, did great at San Diego, and worked his way up, and then went to the pros and came back and struggled mightily in Michigan. What Jim does really well is he does that power football game against teams that have elite fast defenses, and he just runs it down their throat. That's what he did. He's like a big George Foreman. He wears you down and just pounds you and pounds you and pounds you. And then finally pulls away at the end. That's how he's beaten Ohio State. So I mean,
do you
think Jim Harbaugh's a great coach?
The point I was making is that if you look at Jim Harbaugh's record against top 10 teams and James Franklin's record against top 10 teams,
James Franklin's terrible.
They're pretty similar to, but James Franklin still, again, what you're not doing, Tim, is showing me who's better than these coaches, because James Franklin, I'm not going to sell anyone that James Franklin has achieved in big games either, because he hasn't, but there's really not that many coaches better than him.
I get
top
you.
15 coach.
No, he's in that middling section. And what I'm saying is I think he gets a lot of hype. This is my only point. And the numbers speak for themselves. And to say that, well, nobody's win those games. His numbers are abysmal against top 5. And I'll say it again. How many coaches have won a New York Six Bowl? A lot. A fair amount.
That's not the end all be all winning a New Year's Six Bowl.
Here's why.
Especially when you've only coached in 4 of them. And
well, that's a problem.
2 of them were against Alabama teams that were, there was no question, the best team in the country. They were obliterating everyone.
Well, you should.
So that was 2 of them.
If you're a top 10 coach, you should be going to more than 4 games like that.
The other one was against a Trevor Lawrence team that was undefeated and won the national championship. They obliterated everyone, including Alabama, by 4 touchdowns. And the other one was an Ohio State team that was an NFL team that was coming off a national championship.
Well, you said that Lincoln Riley was obliterated a bunch of times, but the only one I can think of is that LSU team that obliterated him with Orgeron.
Alabama the year before.
How much did they win by?
That was a blowout. It was 28-0 like that. That game was never in doubt. Over. Just because they scored a lot of pretty points at the end of the game. That was not.
I see a bias. I'll call bias. You can call bias on my point. I think you definitely have a bias.
No, so, I don't have a. What bias do I have? I could care less about Brian Kelly. I could care less about LSU, Notre Dame. What bias do I have? I just pointed out to you that a game that ended up 38-27, I believe was the final, 45-34, 11-point game, was never a game. It was 28
in the first quarter, it was a bunch of turnovers, right? It was like at the beginning of the game, there was a bunch of turnovers.
Regardless of what it was 28-0 Alabama, and Lincoln Riley got obliterated in that game. The game was not close.
Yeah, there were 2 or 3 turnovers early in the game, and they called themselves back. Who cares, Mark?
That's not an excuse. You're making an excuse for Lincoln. He got blown out in that game. It wasn't a close game.
We're just going to watch the next couple of years.
A close game.
We'll just watch the next couple of years. You absolutely have a bias against Lincoln Riley. Absolutely.
I don't have a bias against Lincoln Riley.
You literally had him out of your top 10 last year.
Yeah. And
you say you had done nothing.
The difference between like 6 and 14 was nothing.
And you have Brian Kelly in your top 10, a guy that's 4 and
I don't know
what against top 10 teams.
You understand the rankings are fluid. Like you understand that what happened last year would have counted in the rankings for this offseason that I have yet to do.
What Brian Kelly did over his 15, 16 year, if you don't go back to his Division II years or whatever. Over the years, I'm not counting his national championships back then. I'm talking about his career in big boy football has been the biggest empty calories career you've ever seen in your life. He beat the teams he's supposed to beat, racked up good records, never played championship games, got embarrassed in bowl games.
Well, he can't play in championship games not playing in a conference. So you're not going to play in championship games.
Correct. So the only thing they could play in were these bowl games, and they got exposed in the bowl games.
Yeah.
So I just don't think beating up on Purdue and Helton SC teams and just all the stuff that he's done in his career, none of it amounts to anything to say, hey, this guy's a really good coach.
Well, Lincoln Riley went 0-3 and
against the 3 national champions.
Well, now he's 0-4. He's matching Brian Kelly in the exact same number that you just gave me. Lincoln Riley has the same exact record as Brian Kelly.
You got giddy there, Mark, but that was his first year after a 4-8 season. And the funny thing, that's why I love when people rip on that game, because USC should not even.
I just outlined why Brian Kelly lifted Notre Dame from a 7-win program to what he did.
USC should not even been in that game.
You're the one who's biased.
Period. Well, if you want to talk about also coaching,
you think for Lincoln Riley.
You think coaching lost that game?
I could care less about Lincoln Riley. Like,
you sure?
Obviously, you know that you're biased toward USC, just like I'm biased toward Ohio State. I admit it. I try to filter that out. I do my very best, but you're biased toward Lincoln Riley, and that's fine. You're a USC guy. I could care less about Lincoln Riley.
I think you'd have to have an anti-USC bias to say that what Lincoln Riley did last year was short of a freaking miracle. Because one of the things you had against Lincoln Riley when you said he was out of the top 10 was that he was handed the keys to, and I would argue that because, Oklahoma was struggling before he became the offense coordinator. They had a pretty bad season the year before he became
him as an offensive coordinator.
Well, and then he became the head coach, and then they won at least 10 games a year, and he was going, you're right, and they were losing to the national champions. They lost They lost to a really good Alabama team. They lost to a really good Georgia team.
I just cited, Brian Kelly's New Year's Six record is basically what Lincoln Riley's is. They're almost exact.
You want to know the difference?
Except what the difference is, he didn't lose to Tulane.
No, you want to know what the difference is? The difference is Brian Kelly's been around 15 years. Lincoln Riley's been around 6. And he's already been to that many games.
Lincoln Riley was handed a much better program at Oklahoma than Brian Kelly was handed at Notre Dame.
Say again?
Brian Kelly was not handed the same program at Notre Dame that Lincoln Riley was at Oklahoma.
He got the 4 New Year's Six games in all those years at Notre Dame. And Lincoln Riley in 1 year took a 4-8 USC team and took him to a New Year's Six. And quite frankly, let's be real, if Caleb Williams doesn't pull his hamstring, they would end up being 17. They went up 21-3. Talk about your blowouts early in that championship game, but he blows out his Achilles in the third drive of the game, and they lose that. Otherwise, they're in the playoffs in year 1 after 4-8 season.
Well, they didn't make the playoffs, and we don't know what would have happened.
Okay, we don't. And then to blame you're making a point about the Cotton Bowl against Tulane. That wasn't coaching. The guy fumbled the ball on a kickoff. It was fluke. This is about as fluky as you can get. Tell me how that was coaching or Lincoln Riley.
I didn't say that it was. We were matching postseason records, and you were taking all that time to highlight Brian Kelly's 0-4 record, which exactly matches Lincoln Riley's.
We'll look at Lincoln Riley's
Brian
record.
Kelly has had to face tougher competition in those 4 games.
Really?
Yes.
So what was it? Let's go through people. Lincoln Riley.
Tulane.
Let's look at the Lincoln Riley teams that he lost to. So he lost to Alabama. Did they win the national championship? Yes.
No, they lost by 4 touchdowns in the national championship.
Oh, to Clemson.
Brian Kelly lost to that Clemson team that beat Alabama by 4 touchdowns.
Okay, and then they lost to LSU.
They won the national championship. Yep.
And they lost a Georgia team that lost in the national championship game.
Yep.
By 2 points in overtime, right?
Yeah.
Something like that, or?
Yeah, and they lost to Tulane. Brian Kelly,
yeah,
as I outlined a few minutes ago, Brian Kelly lost to 2 Alabama teams that were the national champion.
So Brian Kelly lost to the 2011 Champs Sports Bowl.
Okay.
To
you just changed the conversation.
What are we doing? We're talking about postseason bowl games, right?
Well, no, we weren't. We were talking about New Year's Six, and we were talking about playoff and championship games. But now you've changed it because I think I checked that one off in Brian Kelly's favor. But go ahead.
Again, Brian. So how long has Lincoln Riley been a coach?
Since 2017.
So that's what, 6 years? 17. Yeah. So 6 years.
Yeah.
And in 6 years, he's gone to how many New York Sixes?
He was doing what Bob Stoops was doing.
No. I'm not talking about Bob Stoops. I'm talking about his career.
Yeah. He took over a better program than Brian Kelly did.
Bob Stoops went to.
That has something to do with it.
He was part of that. He was part of the resurgence at Oklahoma.
And
they were chugging wind before he got there.
By the way, if you want to make an analogy, Lincoln Riley basically did last season, which I gave him all the credit in the world. I don't understand the perception that I have anything against Lincoln Riley. I could care less about it. Again, I just evaluate him impartially. I don't care about Lincoln Riley one way or the other. Just like I evaluate everybody else. Mel Tucker took over a 2-win Michigan State team and won the Peach Bowl and won a New Year's Six game and went 11-2 and finished in the top 10. Okay.
We're literally comparing Brian Kelly to Lincoln Riley. Is that what we're doing now?
No, I was just giving you an example of a coach who took over an awful football team and then won a New Year's Six game the next year. It's happened. Other guys have done it. Sonny Dykes just did it.
Mm-hmm. But Lincoln Riley's won everywhere he's been.
Okay.
And
so
it's
is
not
Brian
because-
Kelly.
And he doesn't need. Lincoln Riley's never won 4 games in a year like Brian Kelly did.
Brian Kelly has won everywhere he's been as well.
All right. Well, I'll stand by the fact that you think that we'll just remember this going forward, that you feel that Brian Kelly's a better coach than Lincoln Riley.
No. We are having a discussion about what's going on right this second.
They were Stoops wasn't really Stoops the year before Riley got there. They went 8-5. They were 8-5
as before he got there as an offensive coordinator.
And yes,
the year before
correct.
They won the Big 12 and they finished in the top 10 in the country.
Mark, did they win with defense in those years? Do you know how bad their defense was in those years? They won because Riley outscored everybody.
I'm not debating Lincoln Riley as an offensive coordinator. Build a defense, Lincoln Riley. Do that. Can you finally field a defense
in 5 years
is worth anything? Can you do that?
Yeah, he did this year.
I know Brian Kelly has fielded better defenses than Lincoln Riley.
And Brian Kelly has coached for 20 years, Mark. I mean, I think you're forgetting that point. This guy's only been a coach 6 years. He's 40 years old, for God's sake. Yeah, been coaching a long time, filling up on lots of empty wins. And I can't believe you're defending some guy that's 5-15 against the top 10.
I'm not defending him.
Sounds like it.
I'm getting attacked for saying he's a good coach.
And
you never answered the question that there's got to be like 20 or 25 guys better than, and even if you give me the 25th best coach in college football, I still think he's a good coach.
He's not a top 10 coach. No way. Not with a record like that.
Well, where is he?
You can't justify a guy.
You've never answered my question of where he should be ranked.
Probably somewhere between 15 and 20-ish.
Okay.
By the way, that's just truly based on the, like, I give him a lot of credit for Cincinnati. You know the Peter principle, right? Where you kind of rise to your level.
Sure. Yeah.
That's Brian Kelly. That's Brian Kelly. What he did. Oh my gosh, my mom's alma mater in Michigan. I can't remember it now. Grand Valley State. What he did at Grand Valley State, phenomenal. Amazing. Cincinnati, again, amazing. What he did at Notre Dame, not amazing.
I didn't say it was amazing.
Not even great.
No.
He won all the games he was supposed to win and then lost all the meaningful games.
And Lincoln Riley had an excellent run at Oklahoma. You know, if we could take all the comments I've ever made about Lincoln Riley, I don't know what you're talking about, because if we could take all the comments I've ever made about Lincoln Riley, I've given him credit for all that he's done. But he's not perfect and he has not delivered all the time.
So he had Mike
and he's got the same postseason record in big postseason games as Brian Kelly.
I think what you're missing is in about maybe a third of the time that he's been a coach as Brian Kelly, he's been in the same amount of New York 6 games. And Brian Kelly does have a Cotton Bowl win. And really, if that poor kid had caught, I'm not going to say his name, had caught the ball at the 2-yard line, Lincoln Riley have 2 Cotton Bowl victories. So to put that on a coach, you fine. We can say, well, he lost. That's the way it is. But I'm truly shocked that you're comparing the 2 coaches, because they are literally not on the same plane. Lincoln Riley has won like 86% of his games as a coach, 85% of the games as a coach. Regardless of what he was given, we've seen guys at Oklahoma, for instance, or at Oregon, who were handed a really good program, and then it just dies. What he did is he raised it back up. Stoops was doing really good, but he dipped down. It wasn't the early Stoops. I mean, Stoops only won 1 national championship in the very beginning of his career. And they won games, but They also lost. If you remember, the joke about that was that Stoops couldn't win the big game, right? People always say he couldn't win the big game. He got hammered in BCS games. Maybe it's an Oklahoma thing. Who knows? Maybe he can't win big games in Oklahoma. I remember a lot of BCS games that Oklahoma probably shouldn't even been in. And he wasn't winning them. But Lincoln Riley did bring that program back up. And he did just bring up USC back up. And I think all these people hand-wringing about how bad our defense is are in for a big surprise this year. And I can't wait. I'm not going to talk now. Let everyone do the talking how bad Lincoln Riley doesn't care about defense and doesn't have a defense. I'll let that sit for a while. And then we can see.
What he's
we'll all
showing
talk
us
at the year.
point.
You guys told me that Lincoln Riley can't have a good defense.
Brian
Well,
Kelly
give him more than 1 year.
elevated Notre Dame football further than Lincoln Riley did Oklahoma football.
One more
That's
time?
not debatable.
What's that?
That Brian Kelly elevated Notre Dame football further than Lincoln Riley elevated Oklahoma football. That's not debatable.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
That if you take over a program that's winning like 55% of its games and you lift it to the level that he did, you've done more than lifting a program that's already going to playoffs and major bowl games, and you basically just do the same thing.
That means nothing.
Sure, it does.
How does that mean something?
We're just talking in circles.
No, but my point to you is you're saying what was
I've made this point about
Lincoln Riley
14
gets
times.
penalized. Lincoln Riley gets penalized because he took over a program that was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. Again, the reason why you want to talk about, you keep saying that Stoops was the coach, but realize this: the defense was trash. They got rid of Heupel because he didn't work. And they went 8-5, and they bring in Lincoln Riley and his offense, and we saw he won Heisman trophies with that offense.
I'm still trying to hear of the 20 or 25 coaches that are better than Brian Kelly.
No, I'm not. That's not the point. The point is
waiting for that.
The point is the guy's record. That's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for you to justify how you put a guy in the top 10 who literally is 5-15
Because
against
there
top 10 teams.
Aren't 10 or 12 coaches better than him. That's why. That's how I've done it.
No, we'll disagree. We'll see how Brian Kelly does the next couple of years. We'll see Lincoln Riley.
And that
it's fruitless to argue it right now.
And that will
you're setting your decision.
And
I'm
that
setting
will
my
be
decision.
completely inconsequential to what we just talked about, because then I'll rank them. It's a fluid situation. It is a fluid situation.
He was an annual disappointment at Notre Dame. They had some of the best offensive lines I've seen in probably the past 20 years. They had a couple.
2012, they were not a disappointment when they went to a BCS championship game when nobody in the world.
What was the score of that championship game?
They got blown out. They went to a BCS championship game when they weren't even ranked.
They weren't good enough. Clearly, were they the second best team?
I understand they weren't good enough. You're speaking obvious claims to me.
No.
You don't think I know that Notre Dame wasn't good enough to play Alabama?
Mark.
Nobody else in the country was good enough.
You're not hearing what I'm saying, Mark.
Georgia.
You're not hearing what I'm saying. There were other teams that were more deserving to be in that game. They got gifted. Right. So why is that an achievement? They got gifted in there.
That was not an achievement.
Not an achievement,
taking
no.
over Notre Dame when they're going 7-6 and lifting them to a BCS championship.
You make it sound like Notre Dame is like, no offense out there, Purdue. Notre Dame is like Notre Dame. You should be able to do that.
You are taking basically the worst coach to defend in Lincoln Riley and saying that it's national championship or bust is basically what you're saying. And otherwise, you've done nothing.
I'm saying that I'm the worst. I'm taking the worst coach to defend Lincoln Riley
in that way, in that manner, in that context. Yes.
No bias, huh, Mark?
Because if the national championship is the standard, then Lincoln Riley has continued to fail in doing so.
How many coaches won a national championship since Riley's been a coach? How many coaches have won a national championship since he's been a coach?
If we would rewind this conversation 30 minutes, you're basically taking my bullet points and using them.
6 years.
I was making these exact points like 30 minutes ago when I was telling you that nobody is winning in this sport in playoff and championship levels except for
you're banging your point, not mine. I'm saying to you, how long has he been a coach? How long has Kelly been a coach? a a football coach. 30
Well,
years.
at Notre Dame, it's
30.
been
No. How many years has he been a head coach?
a long, long time.
A really long time.
Yes.
And you're comparing that and a record against a guy who's been a coach for 6 years. And instead of saying, wow, this guy's been a coach for 6 years and he's been to the playoffs how many times? He took a 4-8 team and took them to what? See, that's what I'm seeing. And I'm hearing you defend a guy who's been around for 30 years and has an abysmal record against quality opponents.
And and you're talking about Lincoln Riley like he's Dabo Sweeney, and he lifted a program from the dust to national championship status.
When did I say that? Now you're putting words in my mouth, Mark. You know that I didn't say that. That's not what I said. Let's look at Lincoln Riley's record against top 10 teams then.
Good to talk to you. We are reviewing stuff that we've reviewed 80 times, and there's 3 people waiting.
Although what's his record then if we reviewed it 80 times?
I don't even know what you said because I've grown tired of this conversation.
So Lincoln Riley is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 3 against top 10 teams.
He's
6 and 3. He has more top 10. He has more top 10 victories in his 6-year career than Brian Kelly has in 30.
Who have they defeated in those games?
Number 2, Ohio State in the horseshoe, 31-16.
Yep.
They beat Texas 39-27.
Yeah, they were not a top 10 team.
They beat. We're going on
at the time of the kickoff. Yes, that's why I'm having you read off this list. So we're gonna cross off the Iowa States and the Kansas States from,
and we're gonna rewrite national championships, and because national championships don't matter because
neither one of them have won a national championship. So that.
Oh no, I mean, saying your criteria usually is what you feel is important, which is fair enough, but doesn't mean it's real. I mean, how else are you going to do? We're looking at, are you doing the research to look at all these teams and find out where they were at the end of the year and do all that? I mean, that's just a waste. I'm not spending that much time on this.
We've spent a lot of time on it.
I'm just blown away.
We've spent way too much time on it.
From now until the end of time,
you forget who you're talking to, and I can tell you where those teams finished.
From now until the end of time, I'm going to hold you. I'm going to hold you to this. That you told me Brian Kelly's a better coach than Lincoln Riley.
I didn't. No.
Yeah, you did.
I told you that I ranked him higher, and I don't even know what the rankings were exactly, like 9 and 12 last season before this next season, in which, of course, I would have elevated Lincoln Riley, and I still have that opportunity to do that because
I'm sure it'd be somewhere around 8 or 9.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
All right, Mark.
Probably in that range. All right, Tim. Good to see you. All right. That discussion just went on way too long. And again, with all that discussion, what was never answered was, where are these 20 or 25 coaches that are better than Brian Kelly? Because of everything that was stated there, the attack was that I ranked Brian Kelly too high, which I don't even know where that was. It was around number 8 in the country, 8 or 9, something in that range. I know Whittingham was 6, and I know Kelly was after that, 7, 8, 9. Okay. Jeffrey, we'll get to you in 2 seconds. So you can throw out all the records and everything. All you're doing is stating statistics to me that I already know. You don't need to prove. I know what Brian Kelly's done, and I know what he's failed to do. I already know that. That's why I was having him read off the teams that Oklahoma defeated as a top 10 Lincoln Riley coach team, because I know where they landed at the end of the season. So the ranking at kickoff can be a bit flawed, or can be a lot flawed, as our buddy Chris Foote knows from calling all the time, talking about BYU beating a top 10 or a number 3 ranked Pitt team that finished 3-7-1. So just clarifying on some of those points. And again, what we didn't get to is, who are the 20 or 25 coaches better than Brian Kelly? All right. Jeffrey, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. I'm glad that you're back. And
thank you.
That conversation was hilarious. I'm not going to talk about it too long because I know you're tired of it. You literally said live that you were tired of this conversation. But I mean, every circumstance is different. That's the thing that people don't really think about sometimes, because Notre Dame is a program that it is harder to recruit at. You're not going to be getting the #1 recruiting class at Notre Dame hardly ever. It just doesn't happen. So Brian Kelly going 10-3, it's not too bad. At USC, it's a lot different. You get the players, kind of stuff like that. And pre-transfer portal era, it was harder to turn a program around from 4-8 to 11-2 or something like that. It was a lot more difficult. And you talk about, like you said, Mel Tucker. I mean, he did the exact same thing at Michigan State, turning them around, and now they've fallen off a cliff again. It's just every situation is different. Tim, I love you to death, man. You're awesome, but
Tim is awesome.
Mark's got you there.
Tim is awesome, and he knows his stuff. And it's not like I think Brian Kelly is Nick Saban and I think Lincoln Riley is garbage. It's I think it's debatable. Like, I don't have an issue with Tim telling me that he ranks Lincoln Riley higher than Brian Kelly. I don't have an issue with that. If you said the same thing, I'd say, okay. Like, but to say that there's no discussion, that it's not even close. And Tim tells us he'll be laughing in November. I don't know what he's going to be laughing about. I don't, if Brian Kelly goes out and goes 2-10 this year, then I'll adjust my rankings. Like, I'm not predicting the future.
Yeah.
Maybe I should root for Brian Kelly to win the national championship this year. Now that would be hilarious.
Oh, then obviously people will not be expecting that at all, but you just never know. But I mean, again, it's just insane to compare two different situations like that. And like you said, both coaches are solid. I think Brian Kelly to me, I compare him to like a Derek Carr as a quarterback in the NFL, as a guy that everyone talks completely bad about, but he's not bad. It's just, he's a solid coach. Brian Kelly is solid. I mean, like you said, I can't name 25 better coaches. I can't even name 20 at this point. I mean, you had Pat Fitzgerald, a few years ago, way up there. David Shaw, guys like that. David Shaw's fired, and then you talk about Pat Fitzgerald. I mean, he's completely tanked.
Yeah, and nobody was bashing me for ranking Pat Fitzgerald there because it was Northwestern and he's winning division championships, and look at the adversity with recruiting and everything he has to go up against, and he's in a league with Ohio State and Michigan, and he's doing all this. Well, out of nowhere, well, I'm going to adjust my rankings. I don't know what's happening there. I don't know. He didn't become a dumb coach out of nowhere. He's still as skilled as he ever was, but it's just not working. And they're looking at having a similar season now. So of course I'm going to adjust the rankings. That doesn't mean that somebody's right and somebody's wrong, because what continues to happen changes. Things change, things happen.
100%. I mean, last thing on the coaches, I mean, the way I look at it when you do the same thing is that talent matters for how good you're going to do as a coach. If you don't have the top talent, you're not going to be winning national titles. I mean, look at TCU. They were phenomenal this past season, but then they got completely destroyed by Georgia because Georgia had better talent. Does that mean that Sonny Dykes can't coach anymore because they got them all the way there and then they get blown? No, they just didn't have the talent to be able to beat Georgia. And I mean, maybe if some fluke happened, they could have won, but Georgia had more talent. But I mean, I give more credit to coaches like that don't have the talent because they don't have the talent versus guys that do. That's why James Franklin at Penn State gets flack, because he's got top talent and they're not winning more than they are. So, I mean, it's different there versus a Pat Fitzgerald. If he goes 8-4, it's a great season because they just don't have the talent. So, I mean, that's why he should be ranked higher for what he does. And if James Franklin goes 8-4, we all know that it's easy. But I mean, that's why Brian Kelly left for LSU. That's why Lincoln Riley left for USC, because they're better programs with better financial situations, more glamour of where they're at than Notre Dame and Oklahoma. So they both left for a quote unquote better job.
I find it hard to believe that LSU would be hiring the 30th best coach in the country.
Man, you got so many good one-liners. That was funny. That conversation was awesome. But the live stream here, you have SEC schedule release. So that's the topic of discussion.
Yes.
And I think that I didn't see the beginning of the stream, so I'm sure you were talking about it. But all I know is when I hopped on, it was you and Tim talking about Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley. So
we'll certainly bring up anything about the schedule that you'd like, and we can bring it up and, of course, visually display anything that you would like to point out.
Well, definitely. Everybody's talking about, online that Oklahoma, they have a extremely tough first, schedule in 2024. That's what everybody's saying. I mean, looking at it, they've got Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, at Auburn, at LSU, at Ole Miss, and at Missouri. That's certainly not super easy. I mean, this is what Oklahoma. I mean, that's the SEC wanted to, add Oklahoma, and Oklahoma wanted to go to the SEC for more money. But now you're playing with the big teams, and I mean, they could lose if they don't improve substantially in 2 years, or over a year from now. That they could realistically, you can imagine them losing 4 or 5 of those games.
Yeah, we had the conversation and looked at this past Oklahoma team, which of course we expect them to be so much better going into the future. But this past Oklahoma team was, of course, the worst one we've seen since Bob Stoops arrived. And I'm guessing they would have went 2-6 against that schedule. They may have defeated Auburn and Missouri. That's probably the way that would have played out. So they need to get better. They need to get much better.
For sure, because, I mean, if they don't, I mean, Alabama is going to still be extremely tough. Tennessee, as long as they continue to be really good. Texas are they back? I mean, the are they back thing just still is one of the funniest things ever. I mean, I think that Texas is getting a lot better, but until they substantially win, you just don't know. LSU with aforementioned Brian Kelly, if they continue to win. I mean, it's going to be a tough road for Oklahoma, and Ole Miss isn't easy either, and we'll have to see with South Carolina. But I think that if they get better, they could go 5-3 or 6-2 at that at best, but I have a hard time seeing better than that. Because that is a very tough stretch. It's a lot easier than playing Iowa State and Kansas State, like a lot of people I'm sure have mentioned. Then you have Texas, obviously the other team that's going to the SEC. Not as bad. I mean, it's not as bad. At Texas A&M and at Arkansas are 2 tough games, especially if A&M does improve again. That's a tough game. If Arkansas improves again with Sam Pittman, those could be 2 really tricky games. Oklahoma will be tough. Georgia, Florida. If Florida gets better, maybe. But I think Texas is a little bit easier than Oklahoma's as of now, unless these teams change.
What I find interesting about the overall concept of it, not looking at the specific schedules, is the SEC, they didn't tell us the recipe. They gave us indications to what they valued and what they did. So you missed this portion of it, Jeffrey. So taking this from the top, number 1, they said home and away designations in 24 were built with the provision that no school will travel to the same location to which it traveled in 23. You know what my response to that was? That's stupid. Who cares? Who cares where they traveled in 20? You are starting fresh, brand new. Look forward, look ahead, build the best schedule you have, and possibly can. Now, if that did not get in the way of that, fine, whatever. They're looking out for a few fan bases that don't want to go to a certain location again. I just don't even understand what that has to do with anything. Who cares? Move forward. 2024 is a new year. Who cares who traveled where this past season? Okay. The opponents were determined based on 2 primary factors: traditional opponents, so rivalries, and balance of schedule strength. So perfect. Those are the 2 most important things. Protect the rivalries and build a schedule that's as fair as possible. Great. They didn't tell us how they were going to do it exactly. They gave us indicators here. So the balance of the strength of schedule was based on each school's winning percentage since 2012. So what I did, Jeffrey, was I kind of fought through every program, because I would have an issue with this system if there were schools that were so tremendously different today than they were 10 years ago. And that's really not too much the case. Florida and Auburn would be the 2 near exceptions that were much better 10 years ago, but certainly they've got the resources to amend that and to become contenders again. And then Tennessee, I guess, on the flip side, although maybe we're giving them a little bit too much credit. They've had one big season, so they haven't really proven that they're back. And then they did the same thing with Oklahoma and Texas. And then they ranked in everybody by winning percentage. So I found that interesting. But so each school's schedule will include 4 opponents, 2 home, 2 away, whose winning percentage ranked among the top 8 conference winning percentages. And then also will include 4 opponents, 2 home and 2 away, whose winning percentages ranked among the second 8 conference winning percentages, or the bottom 8 is what they mean. And the way I interpret that is they didn't want to brutalize Georgia and Alabama too much, or lift up Vandy too much with too easy of a schedule. Because if you went simply by the percentages of the last 10 years, well, Vandy would play like the worst teams every year. And so they want to at least give them 2 of the top teams. And the same thing with Georgia, and especially Alabama, who's obviously had by far the best record over the last 10 years. They would all play all the best teams in the conference unless they put in that provision. So they didn't tell us, like the Big Ten basically told us exactly the model. The SEC kind of gave us what they looked at, but they didn't tell us how they determined that, if you follow me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I called in on the big, 10 release show, which you still weren't back yet. But I mean, the biggest thing that really struck me with the Big Ten is how instead of it being kind of like where every schedule is kind of like even every single year, for example, like Indiana in 2024, their schedule manageable. They don't have Ohio State. They don't have Michigan. And if they're actually a competent team in 2024, you think they could realistically make a bowl game because it's not that bad of a schedule. But then in 2025, it's brutal. I mean, it is a extremely difficult schedule. So it kind of seems like the Big Ten is going more with one year it's kind of easy, the next year it's kind of hard. Whereas here, even though, like you said, they didn't really give all the tidbits away, it kind of seems like they're trying to go for more of it being equal every single year, which to your point is completely impossible because you've made so many videos talking about this stuff before they even started to release it. Now how we're seeing it in front of us, but it's impossible to have everybody's schedule equal. There's no way you can do it. But I do think that making it where it is more equal, as best as you possibly can, is better because at least it will prove who's good and who's not better. Because, I mean, if someone has an easy schedule and you go 9-4, I mean, it's harder to say they're good than if a team has a brutal schedule and you go 8-5. I mean, it's like that team's still better. That's why you see like that one year. I remember when Auburn played Purdue in one of the bowl games. It was actually, I think it was the bowl game when Tyler Trent passed away a few days later. I was so unfortunate, still remember that. But yeah, Purdue was like 8-4, and Auburn was 7-5 or something like that. And Auburn beat them 6-7.
Purdue was 6-6.
Oh, Purdue was 6-6. I couldn't remember, but I mean, I think Auburn's record was a little better, but still, Auburn beat them. And if Auburn had the worst record, they still would have beat them by that much because they had a better team. It's really unfortunate. I mean, I know this has nothing to do with what we're currently talking about, but basically, to make these schedules as close to equal as possible is smart. Like you said, the SEC is trying, at least it seems. So I wish they had gone to 9 games. Or the Big Ten would have gone back to 8, because I really wish all the conferences would go to back either 8 or 9, because it should be that way. I know you've talked about it as well, but they're never going to do it, or it's going to be a while before that gets rectified. But the SEC just wants to get as many teams in bowl games as possible. And the Big Ten, they're looking at the financial revenue for it on TV.
Well, you probably didn't catch my take on the Big Ten last night, but I love what the Big Ten did with its schedule. I would have to sift through it to a T to try to figure out how to criticize it. But I basically don't have any criticisms for it because they protected every game in the conference that's meaningful, every rivalry. They left it up to the schools to determine rivalries. They had the difficulty of trying to make it logistically work in terms of mileage and the travel back and forth. They did that. The thing that they did that I love and of course, not listening to me, but I've been talking about this for 10 years, that not every school has the same number of rivals. So every conference is constantly determining that everybody has the same number of rivals. Everybody's got 3 rivals, or everybody's got this. No, they don't. So why make up rivalries? Don't do it. So the Big Ten, thank you. Northwestern, Illinois, those are the only 2 rivals they have. That's it. USC and UCLA, until something changes, that's it. Iowa, on the other hand, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska. Great. Protect all 3. You can do it. You don't have to have everything as a cookie cutter.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like you said, where every team is the same amount of rivals. The only one that was interesting to me, I did ask this to Tony when he was doing the Big Ten show last week with the schedule, and Indiana, Michigan State was not, completely protected. And I get that it's not I've always, when I was younger, was always confused. Why is this a rivalry game? But it's got a trophy. So, I mean, it has a trophy. So to me, it's a rivalry game, even if it's not really a rivalry game and logistically, but I mean, they do have it protected for the next 2 years, but after that, it's up in the air. So who knows? But I mean, did you feel like that one should have been completely protected, or what they did was fine because it's not really that big a deal, even though it has a trophy?
Yeah, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't.
I know it's Indiana.
you know Indiana football. Therefore, you were smart enough and knowledgeable enough to bring that up. I guarantee we've got 119 people watching right now that no one knows anything about Michigan State's trophy game with Indiana. I do. I couldn't tell you what it is.
The old brass spittoon.
Yes, that's what it is. But also Penn State has a land grant trophy game with Michigan State. They did away with that. The Illibuck, Ohio State and Illinois, gone. And it was gone years ago because they separated them. Minnesota, Michigan, you talk about what down through history in the Big Ten has been a big rivalry. They did away with that a long time ago.
That's really interesting. I mean, I didn't really think about that, but you are right. I remember the land grant. I forgot what Michigan, Minnesota's. I think it had a name too, but I can't remember.
The little brown jug.
The jug. I do. I remember that now because I have it on the old Wii game.
They got rid of that.
It shows it on there. I was like, what was it? The jug. That's it.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's crazy. But I think like for Penn State though, and Minnesota, they have like other rivals that matter. Like for Indiana, since Michigan State, the Big Ten showing that it's not really a big deal, which I get. I still don't know why it's a rivalry game, but Indiana Purdue will technically be their only rival, theoretically, especially if they do away with Michigan State being annually. So it's interesting. I mean, you would like every team to have 2, but like you said, sometimes it just doesn't work out. I mean, teams like Notre Dame have tons of rivals because they've been an independent and they're playing all these teams. So they've built these rivalries with Purdue and USC and Michigan and all that.
I think, Jeffrey, actually, we can credit Brian Kelly for those rivalries. He built those rivalries at Notre Dame. I think
Tim's
he's
not happy about that.
Yes.
Can't give Brian Kelly credit.
Well, what makes me laugh as well, and this has nothing to do with the SEC schedule, is somebody commented after I said we have 119 people watching. Somebody commented that there's one person watching. I'm guessing that they're watching on one of the SEC channels, like one of the ones that nobody watches, apparently, and to them, like one person's watching, but. So I just found that kind of funny. So to them, one person's watching, but if you think about it, person, sir or miss, whomever you are, just by the 2 of us talking, there's more than one person watching. But anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. But there was also a comment made about Texas and Oklahoma. Somebody made a comment wanting to know, oh, shoot, I lost it. Something about the way they're treating them or how often they're going to be played. That's the secret in this formula. Nobody knows. We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes stuff being secret, I mean, it makes it more interesting because we'll kind of like figure out more as it goes along, and it's not all kind of like presented to you. So sometimes it's better to know almost everything, but sometimes it's a lot better not to know because then you can be surprised or figured out on the way. It's crazy. John,
is
John, I'd love to
pleading.
call in more on the Big Ten live show. But
Yes.
it's at a bad time.
Oh, sorry about that. When do you need that to be, Jeffrey? We'll move it for you.
Well, I mean, usually I call in like 10:30 or later. I love to call in earlier. It's like dinner, and then I got stuff going on.
Okay.
But, I mean, I try to call in sometime, but I mean, because you guys are all awesome. One Scoop John's awesome. I tried to call into him on the other show last week, but he had to leave, and then Tony came on, and I was talking to him because I was in the back room when One Scoop John was still on. But yeah, I'll try to call in once.
You used to tell me, Jeffrey, that on Saturday night I was on too late.
Well, I mean, like the problem is that I would get on, and then what would happen is that there'd be like 15 people in front of me because everybody's wanting to talk about the big game. So when I got on, I was like, well, forget talking about Alabama versus whoever they play. I'll just talk about Indiana because nobody's talking about
Indiana,
them.
Maryland.
They got beat by 40. But I mean, the thing is that I would be on at like 12:31 a.m. Like, I gotta go to church. So it's like it was just one of those things where it's like it's a very niche time. Like right now, it works because I called in and only had to wait for you to finally get tired of listening to Tim's argument, and then I could come on.
And we love Tim, and Tim's phenomenal. And I just grew tired of it. I was just repeating myself. Anytime I get into, okay, we've gone over this, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
never
I
got
had
the
the
answer
same-
to my 20, which 20 coaches are better, but
I have no idea. But I had the same thing with Tim a long time ago because back when I had a live stream with the other guys, and we were doing the most surprising and disappointing teams, I had USC in the honorable mentions. I did not have them as a top 10 surprise team. And Tim was like, how do you not have USC as a top 10 surprise team? How do you have them in the honorable mentions? I thought you knew what you were talking about, Jeffrey. And I'm like, Tim, I don't, because I expected them to go like at least 9-4 or 10-3, and they barely did better than that. So I'm like, to me, they were good because they got Caleb Williams, they got Travis Dye, they got all these players, and I'm like, to me, it wasn't too shocking. And he was like, you don't know what you're talking about. They were 4-8. It's hilarious.
Yeah, they were 4-8, and it was a great job done by Lincoln Riley. I'll repeat that. Great job by Lincoln Riley there, and I picked him, I believe, 9-3. But it wasn't shocking because I knew that Lincoln Riley, being the great coach that he is, would certainly have elevated USC football.
Yeah, absolutely. I had teams like UConn on the list and stuff like Duke that don't usually do well. I had them on the surprise list, not USC. I mean, and the thing is, I even told Tim, I was like, if Clay Helton hadn't gotten fired at the beginning of the season, they do better than 4-8 because USC quit at the end of the season. I watched them play Cal in like the final week of the season or something like that. And they lost that game because of the fact they were barely going out. I mean, the players were barely even running around out there. I'm like, this team's so much better than Cal, and they're losing on FS1 at 10:30 at night in the final week of the season because they don't even care anymore. And I'm like, you're trying to tell me that this is a 4-8 to 11-win team or whatever? No, they should have went around 7-5, 8-4. It wasn't the biggest jump, but USC wanted to go ahead and get rid of Clay Helton.
Good stuff on here. Our guy Jason says the college football national championship has never been legitimate. No one can argue that. Well, I always love when people tell us that nobody can argue something, and then other people tell us that something's a fact that's not a fact. Like I'm not putting words in Tim's mouth by any stretch. This is just an example. If he would have said, like some people would say, well, Lincoln Riley's just a better coach, that's a fact. You see this. Well, no, it's not. That's not the definition of a fact. It's always been subjective. That's why college football exists in a limited bubble. I don't understand what that means.
Me neither. I mean, the only bubble I remember sports is the 2020 NBA bubble. That's about all I know. I don't know. College football is this vast expanse of conferences and teams.
Yeah. When I hear limited bubble, it sounds like he means that it's not that popular because it's limited. Well, it's not as popular as the NFL, but it's extremely popular. So arguably the second most
gaining
popular
popularity,
sport.
Probably.
So, Jason, I would agree with you that it is subjective. That doesn't mean that the national championship, I don't think it's illegitimate. But yes, it can be questioned. I'm releasing a series right now. I just did the second part. I released it a few hours ago, where I'm looking at each season throughout the history of college football. And during the playoff era, I am not questioning any national championships. They were one on the field.
Mm-hmm.
I can question who was selected slightly. So I do bring that up, that there are some teams, UCF, Penn State, and others at various times that have an argument that they could have been added to the field in place of somebody else. But you'd 4 of the top 5 teams in the country playing, and somebody won 2 consecutive games to win the national championship. So, I'm not debating any of these as being illegitimate. Now, once we get back into the BCS era, that's a different deal.
I mean, 100%. I mean, you look at like with the playoff era. I mean, most of the time the teams that make it deserve it. But I mean, you can make an argument Alabama should have been over TCU. I mean, because they're a better team. I mean, Alabama was a better team than TCU, but TCU deserved to make it. I was glad they made it. They deserved to make it, based on what they did. But I mean, like you said, everything, the circumstances are always different, and that's what makes college football so much fun, because we can come on and talk about it, debate, all these different scenarios, and some people will never agree with you, and then it's until the next time you debate it. It just gets funny.
So, Jeffrey, does this happen to you on your platform that you get misquoted? Like right there. I've never said that UCF is the national champion. What I said was they have every right to hang a banner and say, we're the national champion. They won every game. They did everything they possibly could. I think it's great if they want to hang a banner and say, we're the national champion. We did everything. That doesn't mean that I believe that they're the national champion. I'm just saying, go ahead, do it.
I mean, the only people that believe UCF is the national championship or champion from that year is UCF fans, or just people that like to play it up because it was something fun to talk about back then. When the group of 5 should have made the playoff. Now that Cincinnati did it, which now they're not even group of 5 anymore, which technically July 1st is when they are. But I mean, so they still technically are a group of 5 for like 20 days, more days, something like that. But I mean, UCF was not a national champion, but I mean, hey, it's fun to have it on the side of their building, 2017 national champions. But to your point, have I ever been, someone saying that I've said something that I've never said? Yes, all the time. I mean, you talk about like the one time I was on with someone talking about, Michael Jordan versus LeBron. And I said that you can make an argument for both. And then people are like, oh, that means you're saying that Michael Jordan's better than LeBron. How could you think that when you weren't even alive when Michael Jordan played? I didn't say that. I said that you can make an argument for both.
Absolutely. I am right there with you on that argument. I'm not a huge NBA guy, but I did watch a ton of NBA for years and years and years. And people can't distinguish that. If you said Michael Jordan's the greatest of all time, I would say, absolutely. I think that's a great argument. I'm not, or if somebody said LeBron is, I would say the same thing. I don't think it's definite one way or the other. I think it's a great argument that could be waged in either way. I tend to argue LeBron slightly. That tends to be my argument because I just, for a number of reasons I won't get into, but just because you think somebody is the greatest of all time, or you slightly think that's the better choice, doesn't mean you completely invalidate anybody who says that, the other team or player is the greatest.
100%. I think the craziest thing about YouTube in general is the fact that I try to avoid bold statements. I just try to just say things, as most people would agree with them. So I'm not trying to be like generic or bland, but it's like, I'm not going to say something in the nature of Tom Allen is the greatest coach in the history of ever, or the greatest, head coach in Indiana history, because even Indiana fans go, no, it's not Tom Allen. You could go Bill Maller, you could go somebody way back in the past, something like that. But I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be saying Lee Corso. He's probably the funniest coach ever. But I mean, I think that, but most people with YouTube, though, it's just, you don't even have to say anything controversial for people to make a controversy of it. You don't even have to. All you got to do is just say something. It's like, for instance, in one of my videos the other day, I just said something nature of it. This player will play center for this team because he's 7 foot. But then someone told me that, no, he's going to be a power forward because he shoots threes. I'm like, centers can shoot threes. They don't have to play power forward, to shoot three. I mean, if you're a center, you can still shoot them. It's like, all I'm saying is he's 7 feet tall. He'll probably play center. I don't know, because no one knows what the rosters are going to look like in basketball or football for that matter. It's like someone saying, oh, this quarterback's definitively going to be the starting quarterback. I have no idea whether Indiana's quarterback's going to be Taven Jackson or Brendan Sorsby. So I say it could be either or. But then someone's like, oh, it's going to be Taven Jackson. You don't know what you're talking about. Basically, again, all you have to do is just say something for people to find a disagreement with. And again, that's what makes this awesome.
I'm going to make one point, and then if you want to hang on here, obviously you can leave if you'd like, but we've got 3 other callers. I may just bring in the free-for-all and just let everybody chime in at the same time as we conclude here. But I've had a little bit of fun recently with naming the dumb fan base of the day. This is not something I planned. It's nothing like that, but it struck me one day when I had a bunch of moron Notre Dame fans that were just completely delusional attacking me on Twitter. And I would never name dumb fan base of the day for one particular person. It's got to be like a legion of people, like 10 or 12 people. Then I say, okay. And it's just a fun thing. People shouldn't be taking all of this big offense to it. So I believe my first one was, again, Notre Dame, dumb fan base of the day, because we had a particular person telling me that Notre Dame was better than Ohio State because they only lost to Alabama by 17 points in 2020, and Ohio State lost to Alabama by 28 points. Even though every other statistic I gave them was completely lopsided in Ohio State's favor, including winning 5 consecutive games against Notre Dame, and finishing, like, I lined up top 10 finishes, top 5 finishes, obviously national championship, everything in the last like 10 years, 15 years. It's not even close. And this person, plus I was arguing that if you actually watched those 2 games, you saw that Alabama jumped out 17-0. They were up 31-7 with just a couple minutes left, let Notre Dame score a meaningless touchdown in the last 3 minutes of the game that meant absolutely nothing, while Ohio State eventually lost by 28, but it was 14-all. It was 28-17 at half. It was 38-24 with 6 minutes left. It was a competitive game. And so you got to watch the game. And so I just obliterated this guy in every such way. But he, meanwhile, had all these Notre Dame fans jumping out in his favor. And so I said, I'm going to name Notre Dame to be the dumb fan base of the day. And I've done this. My last one was Michigan the other day. I have received so many horrible comments on the Michigan channel from people taking offense to this, naming Michigan the dumb fan base of the day because they were just simply the dumb fan base of the day. But I include in that in parentheses, if it does not apply to you, then don't take offense to it.
I completely agree. I mean, that's like the whole issue with like the internet today is people get upset about things that don't even affect them in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, to your point, when you talk about that, it's kind of like that Notre Dame Wisconsin game. That game was really close that one year until the end when Graham Mertz threw all those picks. I mean, it's like the game was close until the end. Or you talk about like if Ohio State and Michigan play Indiana and Ohio State beat Indiana by more than Michigan, but Michigan beat Ohio State that year, then Ohio State fans are going to say they're better. That doesn't matter.
So we're going to introduce our other folks as we bring in, and John had made a comment in the chat. John loves the panel format. I have to admit, I'm going to be very upfront and say, you know what? I hate the panel format. That's why I bring on callers individually so I can talk. I don't want a free-for-all. That's John's thing. That's not my thing, but we're going to do it right here. But first, before we cut George and Hunter, and I forget who else we've got there, Golden Playbook loose, we're going to address this ridiculous comment here from Michael, who says, oh, I don't even know what this means. Ohio State is number 1 in loss margin in the college football playoffs. That's not even anywhere close to being accurate. So, Michael, if you would like to call in and explain that to me, that there is no accuracy in that whatsoever. I don't even know what you're talking about.
I don't know.
All right. All right, guys. Hunter, how you doing tonight? All right. Hunter will join us when he does. George?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Good to see you, George. What's going on?
I'm doing great. I'm going to try not to add to the free. I'm going to try not to add to the free for all. I'll just be quiet and watch, unless I really have something to say.
Well, we always like to hear from you, George. Hunter left us for some reason. Golden Playbook,
Well,
how you doing?
okay, since no one else is here.
Golden Playbook, are
He's
you here?
Yes.
Yes, how you doing?
Doing good.
Oh, this is a good one. Hang on just a second, Golden Playbook. Here, Joe Long, who I have begged to call me because he said Ohio State is the most overrated program in the country. So Joe says, Mark, you are clueless. Notre Dame lost to Alabama. Wasn't nearly as bad as Ohio State getting killed by Bama because overrated. State shouldn't have been in the playoffs after only playing 7 games. So the Notre Dame team that lost to Alabama, they belonged in the playoffs after losing the ACC championship game by 24 points. But Ohio State, who beat the ACC champion that blasted Notre Dame, that Ohio State team that beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns, they didn't belong in the playoffs. Right.
One of my favorite things is when someone makes a comment and then makes a nickname about a team, like overrated State there. I love also, like, so many people go LS who, and I'm like, you can do that with any team that has a U on the end of it. OS who, I who. I mean, what? It's like, come on. I mean, come up with an actual insult.
I love this, that he's invalidating Ohio State's entry into the playoff when they beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns and Clemson beat Notre Dame by 24 points in the ACC championship game. Okay. Joe, please call anytime.
He's saying that you hung up on him.
Yeah. And that's possible, but Jeffrey, I think you've seen enough and you've talked to me enough. I may have hung up after like 28 minutes of nonsense or something, but like I've never hung up on anybody unless I've told them specifically, right, I am about to hang up on you because you're clueless and don't know what you're talking about.
You've only hung up on people after my 3rd call of the night, and you're like, George, you can't call 3 times. That's the only time I've seen you hang up.
Oh, guy George. Yes. Sorry, George, for doing that. George has commented to the channel more than anybody in history.
That's amazing.
The
other games are important.
When they
play Indiana, it's important.
I agree.
Yes.
Go Indiana.
So Joe's telling us that when Ohio State played their one game last year, I don't know, that might have been the Michigan game, but when they beat Notre Dame, that wasn't their one game. I don't know.
That is hilarious. I don't know.
Golden Playbook, are you still with us?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have a comment or question?
So, like, I don't want to bring it up too much because I know you're kind of getting tired of it.
But that's quite all right.
The Brian Kelly thing.
Who?
The Brian Kelly, LSU.
Yes. I got you. Yes.
Okay. I'm not saying Brian Kelly is a bad coach. He just wasn't. He's just not really an elite coach. That's all I got to say.
I agree with you. I did not call him an elite coach. I just said he was roughly one of the top 10 coaches in the nation.
Elite is usually only reserved for like the top 4 anyway.
Yeah.
What do you think of Marcus Freeman?
Well, right now, like I said, I'm not gonna get my hopes up too much about Marcus Freeman. Of course, he's got to be able to land all those, 5-star players that he was trying to get. So I'm gonna see how the roster, plays out until I say he's gonna be a good coach. But other than that, I think he's his work ethic is second to none, like compared to Brian Kelly's.
Yeah. Brian Kelly does not have the reputation of being heavily involved in recruiting, but he still brought in. See, this is what I found amusing. And this doesn't mean that Marcus Freeman is not going to take this program to great heights and win a national championship or whatever he's going to do. And that doesn't mean that he's not a better recruiter than Brian Kelly. But during the entire offseason, in which Notre Dame, for much of the offseason last year, the #1 class in the country, all I kept hearing about was how great Marcus Freeman was as a recruiter compared to Brian Kelly. But when it all landed at the finish line, Marcus Freeman brought in the 9th or 10th rated class in the country, which was roughly what Brian Kelly was doing before that.
Right. Like the 2024 class, people were saying that it was like number 3, but of course that drops, on signing day. So if Marcus Freeman is, if he's at least lower than Brian Kelly, I think that's a good sign. But if he's around the same spot, I think it has to do like with what you guys said with the academic standards. I know it is a little different. It's harder to get talent in there. It could be done, but you just have to put the effort in. That was the biggest issue with Brian Kelly. Okay, people could use the academic standards as an excuse, but you got to put the effort in, to get the talent. Because if that's your ultimate goal, to win a national championship, you have to try to go get the talent,
We've got a stats update. I've never seen this statistic before that Tim is enlightening us on. 5-15 against the top 10. I don't know who's 5-15 against the top 10. Maybe somebody can fill me in on that. But
I'm guessing it's Brian Kelly.
Oh, really?
Or Marcus Freeman.
I thought it was Burger
I'm
King.
guessing. I don't know.
What's Jim Harbaugh's record against top 10 teams? Something in that range.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I kind of find them to be similar, like Brian Kelly and Harbaugh. They just couldn't win big games. I mean, Harbaugh still can't win a big game.
You don't think
maybe
beating
he's
Ohio
talking
State
about
is a big game?
I'm talking about winning semifinals and all that, getting to the national championship.
Yeah, I understand, but to me, that's a big game. To me, they don't get any bigger.
See, this is the negative effect that the playoff has on all of our minds, is that now the playoff is only the big game now. None of the regular season games are big games. They don't matter. You have to win those games to get to the playoffs. So It's still theoretically a big game.
And I understand if somebody wants to
win a
make
national
that
championship, though.
Well, if you want to make that your criteria, that's fine. That can be your criteria. I just don't agree with it. And again, Jim Harbaugh beating top 5 ranked Ohio State teams in what is the biggest game for those two schools, to me, is I don't think there is a bigger game in existence. And he's beating teams that are as good, if not better, than some teams that he would play in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, because that is the biggest game of the year. So all I'm saying is that in terms of winning, because last year they got to the semifinal, got curb stomped by Georgia, and then this year, I think that was 2021 when that happened, and then last year with TCU.
So we're basically going back to the Tim conversation. And my point is that if you make that the criteria, if you make that the standard, nobody's doing that except for Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart, and Nick Saban. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody else is winning playoff games. Those are the only 3 guys that win playoff games.
Plus, something that I think is kind of interesting when you look at that 5-15 record, and I have no idea, so I could be completely wrong when I say this, but I wonder how many of those games Notre Dame was even favored to win. Probably not that many.
And whose fault is that? Brian Kelly?
Well, I mean, Notre Dame still isn't, I mean, all I know is Notre Dame has not been an elite program since I've been alive.
Okay. In
I'm
Indiana,
about to.
and you're a fan of Indiana, right?
I'm going to go to bed and let all you guys argue.
I'm an Alabama fan, too, from ancestry. Indiana's my feel-bad team.
Can you hear me, Mark?
What's up, Mark?
We have everybody here, so let's go in order. Jason, what's going on tonight?
Not so much. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. What you got for us?
This Kelly thing. I think.
Oh boy, I can't get away from this.
Yeah, I know.
Rename it the Brian Kelly Show.
I think you can have an argument for either. I think you could have an argument for Kelly being ahead of Lincoln, or you can have an argument for Lincoln being ahead of Kelly.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah, and as far as the top 10, if you take Kelly out of the top 10, who are you going? My question is, who are you going to replace him with? I mean, who are you going to replace him with?
Thank you.
That's another strong argument.
And another strong argument, Jason, to me at least, the way I look at things, like if somebody would come on here and rant and rave about Brian Kelly's not a top 10 coach, and then if I asked them to rank the coaches and they ranked him like number 12, I would be like, okay, well, 12,
how is he top 10?
Yeah.
Like the last,
right.
I didn't do rankings this offseason, but I did them last offseason, and I basically stated from about 6 to 12 or 13, based on just my opinion, this isn't law, but to me, we're like razor close. Like they could be anywhere.
Mark, can I add something to this?
Absolutely, Hunter. That's why we got you here.
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
So I'm not going to spend too much time on the Brian Kelly thing, but I will say this as a diehard Alabama fan. If he wouldn't have went to LSU, and let's say after this season Nick Saban was to retire, I would have zero problems with hiring Brian Kelly at Alabama. That's how good of a coach he is. I wouldn't be mad at all. But so I want to go back to the topic at hand for the title of the discussion about the schedule release. After I've reviewed it and looked at it, and some of the things that I heard you and him talk about, was I think that they tried to have somewhat of a balance to the schedule. I like that they kept the rivalries with Alabama, Auburn, and LSU. I think those are very important, even though that's going to make a very rigorous schedule for Alabama every year. I've seen some people on message boards today talking about how it's unfair to teams like Georgia to have to play. I mean, literally some of the comments from Georgia fans were that they were complaining about how to play Alabama at home. And then some of the other things that I've seen was how unfair it was for Texas and Oklahoma. Well, my thing is, you signed up for this, so now you're playing with the best of the best. So there's not really no complaining when you kind of signed up to be in this conference for the money.
Yeah, well, there's a component in there that, again, we don't know the exact formula, but basically they weighted it slightly toward winning percentage. But they also put a component in there that you can't just be awful for 10 years like Vanderbilt and get all the worst teams on your schedule, that you're at least going to be given 2 of the 8 on your schedule are going to be in that top half of the league. And then they did the exact inverse to not completely brutalize Georgia and Alabama, but they still weighted the schedule. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Why do you get penalized for being good and rewarded for being bad? I never understood that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess for me personally, the thing that I felt was more important going into this whole scheduling thing was keeping the rivalries alive. I think that would have been horrible for the sport if we would have had to Oh, I'm not gonna say with the sport overall, but it would have been horrible for Alabama to have to lose an LSU or a Tennessee game every year. I think that would have been bad. I think that would have been bad for tradition. And I'm very much a tradition guy. I like the pageantry and the tradition of Alabama versus Tennessee and LSU. If I had to pick, if you had to tell me that one had to go away, I would say the Tennessee game, or the Tennessee would have to go away. I love the LSU and Alabama rivalry, and I love the Alabama and Auburn rivalry, but I'm just very happy that they were able to keep those intact. And so, from a little bit of what you were saying about the Big Ten and how they did their schedule, I think I like that model a lot better.
Well, I absolutely do.
But the thing is, somebody's going to complain no matter what you do. So people are going to love it or hate it, no matter what you do. You can't please everybody. But I guess I'm happy with it just on the fact that we're going to keep the rivalries intact. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, so Hunter Shoelace Sooner is saying that I have not heard a single OU fan complain about the schedule. What are you talking about? Everyone I know is excited about the schedule.
I've just seen some of the things on message boards. I'm subscribed to a couple of different like 24/7 Sports and On3. And so there was just a couple comments that I'd seen. It wasn't like overwhelming, but I did see a couple comments about that. And I think
the only person I've seen complaining about schedules is Saban. He's been crying about it. That's all I've seen so far.
Well, yeah, look, Saban. See, everybody.
He's been crying about everything lately, so that doesn't surprise me.
Everybody that says that about Saban has came out and said that we should play more conference games. He said that in the past. He's advocated for that. But he's also advocated for what's best for the sport, not what's just best for Alabama. And I think that's the component that everybody's forgetting when they criticize him about his stance on some of this stuff. I think he's very much interested in the sport overall more than he is just Alabama.
I think something that you said, Hunter, about not everybody's going to agree with you, though. I mean, or on the schedule. I mean, that's what me and Mark were talking about earlier. It's just not going to happen with anything. I mean, there's people that want the conferences to go back the way they were 40 years ago. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. But I mean, whatever you're going to do with adding these teams and doing these schedules, it's going to be flawed in some way. But I mean, at least to your point that they are keeping the rivalries and they're trying to do everything they can to make the schedules fair, even if, to Mark's point, it's not, completely making sense with rewarding the bad teams and, punishing the good teams or whatever a little bit. Like I said, can't make it perfect, but since they're making the moves, at least they're trying to make it as best as possible, I guess.
Oh, yeah, and I want to add one more thing to the whole MJ versus LeBron thing. Why does nobody ever bring up Kobe? Kobe was, in my opinion, better than LeBron. I would still put Michael Jordan ahead of him. But anyway, I just had to put that 2 cents in. I'm a huge Kobe fan.
So what's the SEC's issue with scheduling 9 conference games? I don't understand that. Why is that such an issue?
Well, they don't need to.
Is it a scheduling thing, or I don't know?
It's easier for these teams to get the bowl games when they only have to play 8 conference games.
They don't need to. Nobody's forcing them to.
But I always hear that the Big Ten schedules weak conferences, but Alabama is playing Austin Peay in Week 11, so I don't understand that. But they won't go to 9 games.
Hey, Mark.
Get it.
Yes, George.
Can I would like anybody that is advocating for 9 conference games per year, right? we're going to give them a complimentary entry into the SEC, okay? Now let's name their 9 games. You're going to play Alabama. You're going to play Georgia. You're going to play Florida. You're going to play LSU. You're going to play Texas A&M. You want to keep going? Don't talk to me about 9 games, okay? Because you can't do it, so shut up.
You need to man up and schedule.
You're going to play 9 of those games in a row.
You guys are the big boys, right? You're the big boys. You can handle it, right?
You're playing against. You're playing Rutgers.
George, listen.
You're playing Rutgers in Eastern Washington.
You guys have a big 3 just like the Big Ten. Who are your big 3s? You got Bama. You got Georgia. You got LSU.
You can't even get past South Carolina.
Same thing with Michigan, Ohio State,
you can't even beat South Carolina. I didn't name South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky. Are you crazy? Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Texas. Come on.
Like Kentucky's a good team. Come on, bro.
Unfortunately,
you play 9 conference games
last year.
Is Vanderbilt good too?
Don't worry about the SEC. We're fine. We got this under control. We're going to the playoffs every year, all of us.
I'm about to have to go. But I do have one question for Mark.
Okay. Hang on just a second.
Man, we need the real right now. The real would make this truly the SEC is the best for sure.
Hunter, what do you got?
Okay, my question for you is, overall, are you satisfied with this?
Yes. I nitpicked a little bit about the winning percentage and that weighting, NFL style weighting schedules more difficult toward Alabama and Georgia and easier for the lesser teams. But yeah, they've protected the games. Well, I can't completely answer that because we don't know what the formula is. They just gave us a schedule for 2024 and they gave us a few bullet points in terms of
regardless of the formula.
The Big Ten gave us exactly how they're laying out the schedule, so I could judge that easier.
Yeah, I'm saying regardless of the formula,
that schedule.
If you just look at the way that the scheduling has been done, are you overall okay?
Oh, it's a much better schedule than what we have currently in the SEC. Yes.
Yeah. A team that I think to look out for this year, really, I think is an underdog in the SEC is going to be South Carolina. I think they're going to be a lot better this year than they were last. They could be better than they were last year. I could see them, maybe possibly winning 9 games.
And George, let's not go there with bowl games because what's Michigan's record against Florida in bowl games again? Isn't it 4-1? Yeah, let's not go there, buddy.
I got nothing against Western Michigan, man. Is that what you said? Western Michigan?
I said Michigan.
DJ Fleck's old team was Western
Michigan? Okay.
What's the record
maybe
against
Michigan too. I don't know.
4-1. Yeah, let's not go there.
I'm not gonna talk too much trash about Michigan. They won when was Michigan's last national championship? They won recently, right?
Ooh.
Within the last 25 years, they've won one, right?
Yeah, and how many have in the last 10?
Florida won in 2008. When was Michigan?
I'll give you a better question. When's the last time Florida was relevant? What, 10 years ago?
How trash?
2008,
maybe.
Hey, but whatever. On a bad year, we might win 11 games. I agree, but when was Michigan's last national title? It wasn't that long ago, was it? 30 years, maybe?
97. When was Florida's?
Okay. Well, that's not bad. 2008, but still 97. You're still, better than some schools that have never won one.
One quick question.
They better let the Big Ten.
We need to win another one. You're right.
The last 10,
it's been a while ago.
I know.
Out of the
it's not like Georgia. Georgia waited 40 freaking years. 41 years. So it's not too late, man. You can beat that. You're not that far down.
Just a second, George. We've got Hunter here. Hunter, what you got for us?
out of the last 10 national championships, the last 10 years,
yes,
how many SEC teams have won those national championships?
Well, all of them except for Ohio State and Clemson twice. It's 7-3, 7 for the SEC.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Was that a trivia question?
No.
Okay.
I rest my
They
case.
have to be more difficult than that.
I was speaking to our lovely Michigan fan over here. Anyway, Mark, thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Enjoyed the conversation. And I'll talk to you another time.
Thanks, Hunter. Appreciate you being here. Have a good night. Okay. If I mute anyone, it's to eliminate the noise. So then just unmute yourself when you talk. So I'm trying to find where the the noise is coming from. There we go. Okay. Golden Playbook, are you still with us?
Yes.
Do you have anything else for us?
I just wanted to say, like, because I know you kind of get tired of it, like I said, but Brian Kelly's a good coach and all. Like, he's a really good coach. He may very well do good, at LSU, just because I know the standards are higher at Notre Dame than LSU. So obviously he could probably get more talent. But I don't really see it.
What don't you see?
I don't really see him winning the Natty there.
Well, yeah, I'm not necessarily predicting him to win a national championship. If he does, I would not be surprised. If he doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised. It's kind of like LeBron and Jordan,
right. Yeah,
the previous 3 coaches won national championships at LSU. It can obviously be done there, but if he doesn't get it done, that's a very difficult thing to do that very few people are achieving. So,
yes. Yeah, he's a good coach. We'll see.
I only know one person listening who would guarantee that Brian Kelly would win a national championship, and that's our friend Tim.
Wait, Tim?
I'm going to hop off, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I don't feel like arguing tonight, so have a good one.
All right, Jason. Thank you.
I think if you don't feel like arguing, it probably will not be the best thing to come on here. Because that's exactly what you do.
I did open it up across the board, and I typically don't do that, but we just had 3 or 4 callers, and to wrap it up for the night, I thought I would do this.
It's definitely entertaining.
Well, that's what we're supposed to be in the business of. So.
Hey. About Brian Kelly.
Yes.
I never had any respect for him. I thought he looked like an alcoholic. But then he went to LSU, and now I respect him. He's a great dancer. We've all seen that. And he dumped his old lady, and I think he got some young Cajun girl. He's cool as shit, man. I like him.
And he has a good Southern accent.
He does.
And that Southern accent. I've never seen nothing like that. What a cool son of a bitch he turned out to be.
As soon as I heard that, I thought, oh boy, this is already going off the rails. But no, he pulled it together.
He's grooving, man.
That's a little fishy there to me.
Hey, listen. His wife waited till he got
He's from the South. He's not
his
from
wife
Louisiana.
I know. I'm being facetious. But his wife waited till he got $100 million contract and dumped his ass. She is so rich. She got like $12 million in the bank right now. She's so happy.
Hey, Jimbo Fisher might get a $70-80 million buyout too. Baby.
I can't believe anybody hired Jimbo Fisher from Florida State after he destroyed their program. I'm like, wow. And now he's doing it to Texas A&M.
He won a title.
This dude keeps getting #1 classes and going 8-5. Like He's great. I'm scared when they replace him, they might get a good coach.
I got one last question for you.
Sure. What you got?
So, like,
the answer is Brian Kelly.
Oh no.
Go ahead.
We're done with Brian Kelly.
Okay.
When do you see Nick Saban like retiring? And do you think he'll retire after this season, or?
He's got like 7 years left on his contract.
I think Nick Saban keeps himself in tremendous condition as a 70-year-old. He just turned 70. He's in tremendous shape. He's smarter than all of us put together. I think that it appears as though this is what he truly enjoys to do. He doesn't want to retire. I don't know the man. I've never talked to him. So I'm only guessing that he is going to continue until something happens with either his health or his wife's health or something. Maybe college football continues to become more of a business and more of a professional type approach that turns him off. But other than that, those are the things that I see sending him into retirement and nothing else.
A lot of college basketball coaches have done that. I mean, so many of them are retired. It feels like it has to do with, the new age of the sport.
Yeah,
for sure. But I'm with you, Mark. I think that Nick Saban at least coaches for 5 more years, at least. But who knows?
All right, Golden Playbook. We appreciate you being here tonight.
And what's the guy's name? What's your name again in the blue shirt?
That is Jeffrey.
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean to get too offensive. I just love to talk trash.
Well, Jeffrey's got a YouTube channel as well. Where can he find you there, Jeffrey?
My YouTube channel is Only Talk Sports, and I talk, even though it's Only Talk Sports, I mostly just do college basketball, college football, and NFL, NBA. But I've had some people tell me I need to talk about more sports since I am called Only Talk Sports, but I didn't really get that far. But yeah, that's where I make videos over there. But definitely appreciate you if you check it out. But definitely Mark is by far, he is the definitive for college football. I mean, everybody that comes on to ask, like Mark said, trivia questions, it's not going to get it done. Mark knows what he's talking about. You should have had tons of interviews with Nick Saban already, for sure. I saw the Neil Brown one. That one was really good.
Thank you. We hope to get some other ones. I don't want to state names, but we're working on a few other ones. And when I say working on them, we actually, working out schedules and so forth. So hopefully that comes together. But I appreciate that. That's very nice. Golden Playbook, we appreciate you being here.
All righty. Have a great night, guys.
You too. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Hey, Mark, if you had an interview with Nick Saban,
yes,
what could you possibly ask him that he hasn't been asked 80 quadrazillion times before? Why would you waste his time so he can go, well, I think we have a good team this year, and if we practice hard, we might be able to get it. I mean, what's he going to tell you? I think your time would be better spent. All right. Maybe just a courtesy interview.
Jeffrey, take note of that.
Give me an example question.
Well, hang on just a second. So I want Jeffrey, he's our moderator here, that he can take note of this, that I either have the choice if Nick Saban wants to be interviewed by me to give him a courtesy interview, or that I'm not going to waste my time.
Right. What are you going to ask the guy? What are you going to say? It'd just be a waste of his time and yours.
Hypothetical universe, I would say to Nick, I was like, well, how would you think you would fare if you took over at the University of Indiana or University of Vanderbilt to coach football? Do you think that you could get them to 10 wins?
Yes,
11 wins?
That is a tremendous question, because we've talked about that. You and I have, and others, we've talked about, wouldn't it be just a phenomenal experiment to take the best coaches in college football the real elites and send them off to purgatory and have them try to resurrect Vanderbilt or fill in the blank, Georgia Tech or Rutgers or wherever, and that would be
now that they're established, they could absolutely do it. But why would they? They're all established at other universities. If they left now, everybody would follow them. It'd be easy now. Everybody would go to Vanderbilt if Nick Saban went there.
What I would ask him, George, I would say, in all these years of preparing for opponents, what head coach and coaching staff was the most difficult to prepare for because you thought that they had all their T's crossed, I's dotted, and they were the most difficult to prepare for?
He would say, Urban Meyer, he's a son of a bitch. That's what he'd tell you.
He might say exactly that because they had a heck of a 5-game series that I believe Urban Meyer won 3.
He would say Urban Meyer is the only. He would say Urban Meyer is the only guy that can out cheat me. I thought I was the freaking expert. Urban Meyer taught me a couple lessons along the way.
The other two coaches that he might say would have given him a hard time maybe would be, not counting Kirby Smart now, but like a few years ago, maybe Gus Malzahn or Dabo Swinney. Gus Malzahn always threw a trick on us.
Absolutely. 3-4, which is a phenomenal record against Nick Saban. Now, if you got him on an interview and you could ask him anything and he would be completely candid about it, I would ask him about certain situations like Hugh Freeze and what happened at Ole Miss and how he, what he feels about those type of situations and those kind of coaches getting a second chance.
He would tell his answer to that would be, that's a question for Jimbo Fisher. I don't roll that way. Ask Jimbo.
I know it's off topic what we're saying. It still cracked me up so much when Nick Saban was talking about the Jimbo Fisher #1 recruiting class, and then he mentioned the guy that went to Jackson State. That was so funny. Dion was like, "Come on, I got one guy." Travis Hunter. That was so funny. He's like, "I got one guy. I'm not a threat. I'm still not a threat at Colorado to Alabama."
Deion Sanders is doing what I would do if I was. Deion Sanders is doing what I would do if I'm a football coach. He's making like $8 million a year from Geico or whatever that commercial he does, Aflac. And he's buying his own fucking players. That's what I'd do if I was a coach. I'll spend my whole $8 million to win a national title because I got a 7-year contract. I can do this. Why aren't they all doing that? I'd spend my whole $8 million.
All right. George, we're going to give you a final word, and then Jeffrey a final word, and I think we pretty much finished the night out.
Well,
George, what else you got for us?
I haven't seen the schedules. Is Florida's schedule for 2024 out there?
Yes. We'll show it to you.
Wow, I can't wait to check.
That's what we've been talking about.
I can't wait to check that shit out.
Can you read the screen, George?
I can't wait.
Hang on just a second. So
I can't see it.
Okay, it's at the top of the screen. Florida is playing in conference Texas A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, and Kentucky at home. Tennessee, Texas, Mississippi State on the road, and they still play Georgia neutral site.
That's a hell of a schedule, man.
Yeah, it really is.
Damn. God bless the SEC.
Florida could lose 5 or 6 of those. I mean, maybe 7 if things went really bad.
Well, they can lose to all of those.
I'm not worried about anything. We have Billy. I'm not worried about shit. I'm not worried. We have Billy Napier. I ain't worried about nothing.
I agree with you, Mark. They could lose.
Every one of these.
I don't think they will.
Yeah, they're going to win some games, but they could lose each one of those games. There's no Vandy. There's no Missouri. There's no South Carolina, who's of course decent now, but it hasn't been long since they've not been very good. So yeah, they're missing all their teams that they typically kick around.
Every single schedule I'm looking at, it looks like every team could lose every game. This is insane. My goodness. And we got to play Florida State every year. But those are all hard schedules. I don't care what team it is. Don't add another game, please. Dear God, stop already.
That's why
we got
Vanderbilt has always been at the bottom.
Jason is letting us know that Alabama has an easy schedule.
That's because they're the best. They're at the top.
Georgia, Auburn, Missouri, South Carolina. Well, if you Georgia, Tennessee, LSU. Well, that's not easy. Oklahoma might be back at that point. Well, it's not easy. It might be relatively easy compared to everybody else.
No.
Oh, Jason said wrong year. Did they release the next year's schedule?
I think he's wanting the 2023 schedule. He wants to talk about that. But it's like this is the schedule release. The 2023. We'll be talking about that one really soon.
Right. We're looking at 2024.
Yeah, we'll get to that, Jason.
And you're right, George. A lot of these are hard. That was Big Ten.
Look at Auburn's schedule. That's just vicious. All of them are.
Yeah.
Poor Arkansas every year, all of them.
The Big Ten,
they're impossible.
They need, Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, and they need Iowa to have an offense, and they need Nebraska to get Matt Rule, those type teams to get better. Because then if they do, then the Big Ten will be just as difficult as the SEC, almost on paper. Be exactly the same. It's because those teams are down, or they're not as good as these teams are. I was not down. I was the same every year. But Wisconsin and Nebraska could both be better. Penn State, if they can get into another gear and you add USC, UCLA, the Big Ten could be really close to the SEC and how hard it is.
Absolutely.
I predict that no SEC team will ever go undefeated in conference again. And we will have 2 or 3 teams in the playoffs with 2 losses, Screw these other conferences. Don't even play nobody.
George, thanks for being here. I actually don't
wait
think
a minute.
Those are outlandish predictions.
No, they're not. Hey, before we go, 5 years ago, I said I think we should pay every player on any Division I college football team $50,000 a year. You got 80 players; they all get $50,000. What's that? $4 million a year or something like that. And then if the rich guy, if the pretty boy on the team wants to get a car commercial, he can do that too. They should have did what I said, because now it's all fucked up. You're gonna have a bunch of guys that can't buy a loaf of bread, and other guys making $14 million. That's not a team sport, man. They should all get $50,000 a year. The practice squad, everybody, and because they're getting $80 billion a year from TV rights. They're gonna fuck it all up, man. They better call me. I'll tell them what to do.
George, you used to call up and give me ideas on how we could make 7 figures here, is what you used to do.
Oh,
I think I remember that.
It's not too late.
It's never too
It's
late.
not too late. It might be a bobblehead doll. We're going to do something, man. Mark Rogers bobblehead doll for your car dashboard.
I'd have to have one.
And for electric cars, we make it move, even though there's no rough, idling or nothing.
All right, George. Thanks for being here, man. We are signing off for the night. George,
see you guys later.
Thank you. Jeffrey, anything else?
I don't even know if there's anything else that I could even add at this point. This was a lot of fun. I'm so glad that I called in, and I had a lot of fun talking to you and the other guys. That was a lot of fun. And the 2024 SEC schedule is interesting. It's going to be, wild to see how Oklahoma and Texas do adjust to the SEC. It's going to be interesting how USC, UCLA adjust to the Big Ten. I'm looking forward to it. And I can't wait for this, 2023 season is coming up in around 80 days roughly for most teams. I'm looking forward to that. And I will definitely, hopefully try to call back soon and talk about that with you as we prepare for that. But this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Tim has served up a very difficult question here.
Oof.
Who wins a title first? I would put Kelly last, but I think any one of them can win a championship. But between the other three,
I don't want to say anything, but I would probably have to say maybe Ryan Day or Lincoln Riley, one of the two. I don't know.
Right this second, Jim Harbaugh has the program that is in the most stable, strongest place, but I just don't know if they're going to
keep it there. Yeah.
Or they need to keep going. They're not there yet. They're not Georgia. They haven't shown us that they can play a game like Ohio State played against Georgia last year, or Ohio State's played a number of times in the playoffs, or of course Lincoln Riley in USC. And I've made this comment. Maybe Tim will feel better about my commentary tonight if I'll restate what I've said a number of times, that even though I believe Ohio State's been the most consistent elite program over the last 15, 20, 50 years, and Alabama's been the best in the last, Saban years, that USC, when they are great, when they're at their best, John McKay, John Robinson, Pete Carroll, they churn out all-time great teams.
It's not consistent. It's few and far between. Yeah, you're right about Michigan with Harbaugh, though. They got to do even better. But, I mean, why I said about keeping it there, I don't even know if they can keep where they're at, because the recruiting, I mean, it's really good, but it's still behind Ohio State. It's still behind, where USC is more likely going to be in most years. I mean, it's just going to be very difficult. And I think with adding USC and, in these other teams that could get better, Michigan could slip, back into that second tier with Penn State again. I don't know. We'll have to see for sure. It's going to be interesting, but I would probably have to say Ron Day, maybe Lincoln Riley are the top two for me, but probably Ron Day, because Ohio State was close. If they beat Georgia this past season.
Love your answer, Jeffrey. I'll take your answer. Ryan Day.
They win a title.
What's wrong with Ryan Day's playoff record? I know on surface it's not great, the win-loss record, but you have to talk about the games. They played Clemson down to the wire in a great controversial game that came down to the last play of the game. Okay. Then they beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns the next year. They lost to Alabama in a competitive game until the second half. Then they got blown out in the fourth quarter. And then they lost this. They played Georgia better than anybody by far. What's wrong with Ryan Day's? His teams have shown up in the playoffs. No, the games haven't gone their way all the time, but that's a pretty solid showing in the playoffs.
Definitely, it goes back to the margin of loss. I mean, how you lose does matter. That's kind of like when you rank the teams in the top 25, so it makes sense. How you lose does play a role. If you get beat by 50, it's worse than if you lose by 1 or on a 2-point conversion play. I mean, that's the whole argument why people said Alabama should have been in, because they barely lost to Tennessee and LSU last year.
And the point that you're making right now applies extremely well to what we just saw in the playoff last year. Who played in the national championship game? TCU did. Ohio State didn't. So if you just go by that, TCU's better. They won a playoff game. But we all watched what happened, and we would have a completely different perception of that. Can you imagine if Ohio State lost to Georgia 65-7 And then
then it would be Ron Day should be fired.
Yeah. And then TCU would have played Georgia to a 42-41 game and lost on a missed field goal on the last play of the game. What would we be talking about right now? The perception of these would be completely different, and rightfully so.
100%. I think some of it's just, people like to play it up for sure, with Ohio State, they lost in the semifinal, but everybody knows that was essentially the national championship game. There's no other way you can spin it. I mean, I watched the national championship game and I felt so bad for TCU. I was like,
I did too.
Just score again. Don't end with 7. I just want them to score first, but it is what it is. But I realistically knew that TCU had no chance. I mean, you can't come on, any platform and say that before the game. You just can't say, oh, TCU is going to get blown out. When I said before the game, I was like, TCU, they can hang with them because they hung with Michigan. And since Michigan beat Ohio State and, Georgia barely beat Ohio State, on paper, TCU should be able to hang with them. But the two teams are not anywhere in the same talent realm. It's not even close. And Georgia showed what they are at their best is that. And it was a 65-7 game. And when Ohio State's at their best, when CJ Stroud played like a Heisman winner in that game, even though he didn't win the Heisman, but that was a Heisman-like performance against Georgia. And when Marvin Harrison getting hurt, they lost. But that was a fantastic game. And Ohio State, again, I'm not going to come up here and say, oh, I'm the biggest Ohio State guy. I'm not going to say that. But they should have won the game. I mean, Texas should have beat Alabama, but they didn't last year. I mean, games like that, and I'm an Alabama fan, from family, and I'm like, I could say Alabama should have lost to Texas. It's just the way it is, but the results didn't happen that way, so there's nothing you can do.
Antoine, we love Antoine. He shows up at all these shows, and he's asking about Ryan Day's record and what it is. I will tell you this. It's better than Jim Harbaugh's playoff record. Okay. Absolutely. Everything you just said makes total sense. It just... That's 65-7. It's still every so often just I gotta think about that was a national championship score in a national. We don't every week when we watch college football, where are the 65-7 games? Well, first of all, there's hardly any of them. And when they are, it's Ohio State beat Bowling Green and Georgia beat the Citadel or College of Charleston. Those are the 65-7 games in college football from week to week. It's just that it is flabbergasting how badly they destroyed them.
100%. I mean, I think that the biggest thing for me, because I love both college basketball and college football about equally. I mean, college football, maybe by a little bit, but I love both. But college basketball, I mean, you have a national championship game, and Kansas plays Baylor 2 years ago. In the championship game, Gonzaga was undefeated. I get that they're from a smaller conference, all that kind of stuff. They lost by 18 in that game. They were undefeated, and then they lost to Baylor by 18. But in this past year's national championship game, UConn plays San Diego State, and UConn only beats them by 10 or 12. So the results aren't there. They're not blowouts like you just saw with Gonzaga TCU. The Gonzaga or Georgia TCU. Gonzaga Baylor should have been the game that was closer than San Diego State UConn, but it wasn't. That's because basketball, you can have the way better team, but you can still let the other team hang around because of the fact that your best player on that given night is not having his best shooting night. The problem with football is the line of scrimmages already ends it. TCU's offensive line couldn't hang with Georgia's D-line, and Georgia's offensive line destroyed TCU's D-line. It was not even close. I mean, Stetson Bennett had no pressure. That's a whole other debate, and I know that you want to get off for sure. But you look at Stetson Bennett, in my mind, I know that some people think he will make it in the NFL, and you never know. But he was behind a great offensive line. He's got the best team around him. You put Stetson Bennett on Indiana, and he's hurt within 3 games. I mean, Indiana literally has not had a quarterback finish the season uninjured since Peyton Ramsey back in 2018. So Stetson Bennett, I don't know if he's going to make it in the pros. He's not big enough. It's just not there.
Jeffrey, thanks for the phone call. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you. And hopefully we can talk soon.
You too. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on, and I can't wait to be back. This was awesome. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Real quick, everyone, hang on for 2 seconds. You're on Amazon. almost all of you at some point. A couple people told me this week, hey, just let people know, just clip that Amazon link, put it on your bookmark, and just keep it right there. Same shopping experience. John, thank you so much for posting this. There it is, Amazon link. Grab it and just put it somewhere where you will remember it. Everyone tells me when they use this link, it's just like they're on Amazon now. There is no difference. So please use the link, and you help build the channel, keep us going. And thank you so much for doing that. We've got a deep dive. Speaking of Georgia, we've got a deep dive with Tony Altimore coming up tomorrow night, Thursday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time. We've got a loaded schedule tomorrow night. We've got the South Carolina live show. We've got the Clemson live show. We've got the Georgia deep dive. All of that's coming up on Thursday night. We're going to put together a Michigan-Nebraska 1997 debate show. We're going to simulcast that on the Michigan and the Nebraska channels, probably sometime on Friday night. TBD. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Again, Amazon link. If you enjoy what we do here at the Voice of College Football, we will see you tomorrow night.